Hi guys. Tonight, we step into a high mountain valley where the cold already bites your cheeks before the sun has fully climbed. You stand outside a rough wooden cabin, boots crunching on snow that squeaks like dry chalk. The air smells of pine resin and wood smoke, thin but sharp. Your breath puffs white and slow, hanging in front of you like a thought you forgot to finish. Somewhere in the trees, a raven croaks, unimpressed by your chances. You probably will not survive this if you make even one careless mistake. That is the quiet truth the mountains whisper, and they whisper it to everyone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are listening from somewhere cozy or somewhere equally cold, tell me where you are and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights. You push open the cabin door and step inside, and the sound changes immediately. The wind fades to a low hiss, replaced by the crackle of a small fire fighting for relevance in a stone hearth. The walls are logs, stacked with stubborn hope and sealed with mud that has frozen into something like rock. The floor is dirt, tamped hard by boots and time. There is no furniture to speak of, just a rough bench, a pile of furs, and the fire that decides everything. You close the door quickly, because even a few seconds of open air feels like an invitation for winter to move in permanently. This is the world of the mountain man in winter, and it is smaller than you expect. Your entire life now fits inside a space barely larger than a modern bedroom. That is not poetic exaggeration. Many historical cabins used by trappers in the Rocky Mountains measured barely 10 by 12 feet. That is the mainstream reality historians agree on, based on surviving structures and journals. Small cabins meant less space to heat, less timber to cut, and fewer drafts to fight. Comfort never made the list. You rub your hands together and feel the sting as blood wakes up your fingers. Touch becomes information here. You learn to read temperature with your skin. The logs feel like ice blocks even from inside, and the fire feels both generous and inadequate. You shuffle closer, careful not to scorch your boots. Leather hardens and cracks when mistreated, and boots are not fashion, boots are survival. As you settle, you notice the cabin smells layered: old smoke, animal fat, damp wool, a faint sweetness from pine sap, where resin bled through the logs last summer. It is not unpleasant, but it is not clean. Mountain men accepted smoke-filled cabins because chimneys were imperfect and heat mattered more than lungs. Some trappers even believed a smoky interior discouraged insects and small animals, a quirky belief that shows up in a few personal accounts, though whether it truly helped is anyone's guess. You crouch and feed the fire a split log. Sparks pop and race upward, then vanish into the dark throat of the chimney. The sound is comforting in a primal way. Fire speaks a language you understand instantly. It says, stay close. It says, pay attention. It says, sleep lightly. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. Winter nights in the high Rockies could sink far below what your weather app would politely warn you about today. Journals from the early 19th century mention ink freezing solid overnight, and breath-turning beards into stiff masks of frost. That detail shows up again and again in first-hand writing, a simple fact that modern scholars rarely dispute. Cold was not a dramatic event, it was constant. You lay out furs near the hearth, careful to keep them far enough from sparks. Buffalo robes, deer hides, maybe a wolf pelt if you were lucky or foolish enough to take one. Fur is not luxury here, it is engineering. The trapped air between hairs slows heat loss, doing a better job than most woven blankets of the time. You crawl into them and immediately feel a small pocket of warmth form around your torso. It is not cozy, it is sufficient. As you lie there, listening to the fire chew through wood, your mind drifts to the silence beyond the walls. Snow absorbs sound, turning forests into padded rooms. Some mountain men wrote that winter silence felt heavier than the cold itself. Others found it calming, almost kind. Historians still argue whether prolonged isolation in these cabins damaged mental health in a measurable way or simply filtered out those unsuited for the life. The sources disagree, and the men themselves rarely reflected deeply on their own minds. Your eyes follow shadows dancing along the log walls. They stretch and shrink as the fire shifts. In that movement, you imagine shapes that are not there. A face, an animal, a memory. The brain fills gaps when stimulation runs low. You shake your head slightly and focus on practical things. Did you stack enough wood within arm's reach? Can you feed the fire without standing? Standing means exposure. Exposure invites mistakes. You remember a fringe detail from an old trapping story about men sleeping with their boots on, not for warmth but because frozen boots could become solid overnight and impossible to wear by morning. Some accounts support this habit. Others suggest it was rare because sleeping in boots was miserable. The truth probably depends on the night and the man. Still, the idea lingers as you tuck your feet closer to the coals. Your breathing slows. The fire settles into a steady rhythm. Pop, hiss, crack. Outside, wind fingers the roof, testing the logs like a curious animal. You feel strangely proud of this crude shelter. It is not beautiful, but it stands. It keeps the worst of winter at bay, and in this landscape, that is a triumph. You drift, not quite asleep, not fully awake. Thoughts come in fragments. Tomorrow you will check traps. Tomorrow you will haul more wood. Tomorrow you will survive again. That is the rhythm of winter life here. One day stacked carefully on the next, like logs in a wall. For now, you stay still, letting warmth collect, listening to the small sounds that mean you are not freezing. Not yet. The cabin creaks softly as the temperature drops another degree. You pull the furs tighter and let your eyes close, knowing this is only the beginning of the season and that every night will ask the same question. Are you prepared enough to see morning? You wake before dawn because the cold tells you to. It presses gently at first, then with more insistence, seeping through the furs and reminding you that fire never sleeps, but it does get lazy. The embers have sunk low, glowing like tired eyes. You roll closer and stretch out an arm, feeling heat on your knuckles and frost on your back at the same time. This is how mornings begin here, balanced between warmth and warning. You sit up slowly, joints stiff, breath already visible inside the cabin. That detail alone tells you everything you need to know about the night. Even indoors, winter has made itself at home. Ice feathers lace the lower logs where moisture froze hours ago. It looks delicate, almost pretty, but you know better. Beauty out here often hides a threat. You feed the fire with wood you stacked carefully last night. That planning matters. Mountain men learned quickly that stepping outside barefoot or half-dressed in the dark could end badly. Frostbite does not announce itself with drama. It starts quietly, like a numb thought you forget to finish. So you keep fuel close, within reach of sleep, because preparation is a form of respect. As flames rise again, you think back to how this cabin came to exist at all. It was not built for comfort or longevity. It was raised because winter was coming, and delay meant death. Most mountain men constructed their cabins in late summer or early fall, racing against shortening days. That is a well-established historical fact, drawn from trapping journals and trading post records. Cabins went up fast, sometimes in a matter of days, using green logs cut nearby. Perfection was not the goal. Standing walls were. You imagine yourself weeks earlier, axe biting into pine, each swing sending a sharp scent into the air. Green wood is heavy and wet, harder to split, but easier to find. You notch logs roughly, fitting them together with patience rather than precision. The corners gape. Mud and moss get shoved into gaps by cold fingers. It is crude, but it works well enough to slow the wind. Some trappers even layered animal hair into the chinking, believing it added insulation. That quirky detail appears in a handful of accounts, though archaeologists rarely find clear evidence of it. Still, when resources were scarce, improvisation ruled. You used whatever the land allowed, because the land did not negotiate. The cabin's roof slopes steeply, built that way on purpose. Snow slides off instead of piling up until collapse. This was not advanced engineering, just hard-earned wisdom passed from one winter survivor to the next. Flat roofs failed. Low roofs held heat. Every design choice was written in frozen consequences. You stand and stamp your feet to wake them fully. The dirt floor feels like stone. There is no insulation beneath you, no crawl space, just earth locked solid by cold. Some mountain men slept on raised wooden platforms to escape ground chill, but many did not bother. Lumber took time, and time was always in short supply. Historians still debate whether raised sleeping platforms were common practice or a luxury few could afford. The evidence varies by region and individual. As the fire settles, you inspect the walls, fingers tracing cracks where light might sneak in later. Drafts are enemies you cannot see. You pack more mud into a seam, knowing it will freeze soon and harden. The process repeats all winter. Cracks open, you fill them. The cabin breathes and shifts like a living thing, responding to cold with complaint. Outside, Dawn finally bleeds into the valley. Pale light leaks through the single small window, if you even have one. Many cabins did not. Windows meant glass, and glass was heavy, fragile, and expensive. Darkness was cheaper. If there is a window here, it is small, patched with oiled cloth or animal bladder. Light enters reluctantly, distorted and dull. You pull on layers slowly. Wool shirt, buckskin trousers stiff from yesterday's sweat and today's cold. Each movement reminds you that clothing dries poorly in winter. Dampness clings, stealing heat minute by minute. Some trappers slept nearly naked beneath furs to dry garments with body warmth, a practice mentioned casually in a few journals and argued over by scholars who wonder how common it truly was. Either way, it speaks to constant calculation. You chew on a strip of dried meat, jaw working as you stare into the fire. Breakfast is fuel, not pleasure. Fat matters more than flavor. Calories mean warmth. That understanding is universal in cold climates and shows up across cultures and centuries. The cabin now feels less hostile, but not friendly. It tolerates you. That is enough. You glance at the door, knowing that once you step outside, the world will test everything this shelter stands for. But for a moment longer, you stay inside, letting the fire build strength, appreciating the fact that these walls, however rushed and rough, are the reason you are still breathing. Winter survival here began long before the first snowfall, with choices made in haste and hope. This cabin is proof of that. It is a memory of preparation, frozen into place, holding fast against the season that now fully surrounds you. You step outside just long enough to understand why choosing this spot mattered so much. The cold hits differently out here, sharper, less forgiving. Wind slides down the slope in slow, invisible rivers, pooling in low places and slipping past trees without apology. You feel it press against your chest, not violently, just persistently, as if testing your resolve. This is exactly why the cabin sits where it does. You turn slowly, scanning the land the way you did weeks ago when the ground was still bare. The cabin is not on the valley floor. That would have been easier, flatter, closer to water, but valleys trap cold air like bowls. At night, freezing temperatures sink and settle there, lingering until late morning. Up here on a gentle rise, the air moves. Movement means slightly less cold, and in winter, slightly less can be the difference between numb fingers and useless ones. Men who survived multiple seasons in the mountains learned this lesson early. Trapping records and travel journals quietly confirm that experienced mountain men avoided low ground whenever possible. They looked for benches, small shelves of land partway up slopes, places sheltered from prevailing winds, but not smothered by cold. It was not superstition, it was observation repeated enough times to become instinct. You remember standing here in late summer, squinting into the sun, feeling foolish for worrying about winter when grass still waved at your knees. You tested the wind with a wet finger, watched how smoke from your fire drifted, noted which direction storms seemed to arrive from. These small rituals mattered. They were the closest thing to forecasting you had. Behind the cabin, a rise of timber breaks the worst of the wind. Trees are not just fuel, they are walls that grow themselves. Dense stands of spruce and pine slow gusts and reduce drifting snow. In open areas, snow piles deep and hard, burying doorways and smothering roofs. Here, it scatters more evenly, manageable, almost polite. You brush snow from your sleeves and step back inside, carrying that knowledge with you like another layer of clothing. The cabin feels more intentional now, not lucky, chosen. Placement near water was another careful gamble. Streams freeze, but they do not vanish. You chose a spot close enough to haul ice and melt it without losing fingers, but far enough to avoid damp ground and sudden thaws flooding your floor. Some men built too close and paid for it when spring melt turned cabins into mud pits. Others went too far and wasted precious energy hauling water daily through deep snow. Letters from trading posts complain about both mistakes in equal measure. There is an odd little detail mentioned in one lesser-known trapping memoir about a man who angled his cabin door away from the sunrise, believing it reduced snow buildup. Whether that belief was practical or personal is unclear, but it shows how much thought went into details that seem trivial now. Direction mattered. Everything mattered. You kneel and check the doorframe, fingers feeling for ice buildup. Doors swell and warp in winter, especially when built from green wood. If it sticks shut, panic follows quickly. A stuck door in a burning cabin or collapsing roof is a death sentence. That is why many mountain men shave door edges obsessively, even in freezing weather. Modern researchers examining surviving cabins have noted unusually thin door planks, likely shaped with this exact problem in mind. You glance at the roof beams overhead. They angle steeply, shedding snow, but also creating a tight ceiling that traps warmth. Heat rises. Everyone knows that now. Back then, people learned it through burned hands and frozen nights. Lower ceilings meant warmer air stayed where bodies were. Tall spaces wasted heat, and waste was not tolerated. As you move around the cabin, you sense how the land and structure speak to each other. The earth slopes just enough to drain meltwater. Rocks beneath the soil keep the foundation from sinking unevenly. You did not plan all of this consciously, not with words, but with attention. Mountain men were not engineers by training, but their survival depended on reading landscapes with care most people never develop. There is ongoing disagreement among historians about how much of this site selection was taught versus learned through painful trial. Some argue knowledge spread informally through trading posts and winter camps, shared over pipes and stews. Others believe each man mostly learned alone, losing fingers or friends along the way. The truth likely sits somewhere in between, shaped by region, personality, and luck. You sit near the door and listen. Wind brushes the cabin's outer wall but does not howl. Snow slides softly from the roof with a whisper instead of a crash. These sounds confirm you chose well. In the mountains, quiet is feedback. You chew another strip of dried meat and let your thoughts wander briefly to those who did not choose so carefully. Cabins found in poor locations tell silent stories. Built too low, too exposed, too rushed. Some were abandoned after a single winter, left to collapse under snow and time. Others became markers, warnings to those who came later. The cabin around you is not comfortable, but it feels anchored, grounded. It belongs to this slope now, as much as you do. When storms roll in, snow will stack against one wall more than the other. You will shovel, redirect, adapt. The land always gets a vote, but smart placement lets you negotiate instead of surrender. You stoke the fire again and feel warmth spread slowly, unevenly, the way all good things arrive out here. Outside, daylight strengthens, pale and cold. Soon you will step back into it, but for now, you sit with the quiet satisfaction that comes from a decision made long before the consequences arrived. Survival in winter begins with where you stand. Everything else follows from that single choice. You notice it most when the fire dies down. A thin breath of cold slips along your ankles, sneaking in where logs meet imperfectly. It curls around your calves and reminds you that this cabin, for all its strength, is still stitched together by human hands working fast. Drafts are quiet enemies. They do not roar or announce themselves. They whisper, testing patience, 1 inch at a time. You crouch and press your palm against the wall. The log feels solid, but between it and the next one, there is a narrow seam. Mud fills most of it, frozen hard now, but not perfectly sealed. You push more chinking into the gap, using a stick, packing it tight. Fingers sting as cold seeps through your gloves. This work never truly ends. Logs shrink as they dry. Temperature shifts pull them apart. Every winter morning brings new cracks to discover. Most period descriptions of frontier cabins make it clear that perfect walls were impossible. Logs were rarely uniform. Axes were sharp, but time was short. Men worked with what trees gave them. Square corners and smooth faces were luxuries of sawmills. Not trapping camps, gaps were expected. Managing them was part of daily life. You step back and listen. Wind rattles faintly outside, but inside the sound softens. That is how you know the patch helped. Sound carries cold. When the cabin quiets, warmth holds longer. The floor offers no mercy. Dirt floors pull heat straight from your body. You stomp your feet, then lay down a scrap of hide where you plan to sit later. Some mountain men spread pine boughs or rushes across the ground, believing it added insulation. A few personal accounts mention this practice, though others dismiss it as more psychological than effective. Still, even a small barrier feels meaningful when the earth itself seems determined to freeze you. You glance upward again, following a crack that runs along a roof beam. Smoke stains darken the wood there, evidence of countless fires. Smoke does not rise cleanly in these cabins. It pools, wanders, and sometimes refuses to leave. Eyes burn, throats scratch. You accept it without complaint, because the alternative is worse. There is an odd habit recorded in a handful of winter camp stories, where trappers intentionally left small gaps near the roof to improve airflow, even at the cost of heat. The belief was that stale smoke weakened the lungs over time. Whether this trade-off actually helped is unclear, and later historians examining soot patterns disagree on how intentional these openings were. But the idea itself shows how survival required constant compromise. You run your fingers along a support post, checking for frost. Ice forming indoors is never a good sign. It means moisture is condensing and freezing faster than heat can chase it away. That moisture comes from breath, from melting snow on boots, from boiling water. Cabins breathed poorly, and winter made every breath count. You adjust your furs again, careful to keep them dry. Wet insulation becomes heavy and useless. Many trappers learned this the hard way, discovering that sweat could be as dangerous as cold. Overexertion inside a poorly ventilated cabin led to damp clothing, which then froze solid when activity stopped. Surviving journals repeatedly warn against working too hard indoors during winter, a detail that surprises modern readers who imagine constant motion as safety. You sit and wait, listening to the cabin settle. Logs pop softly as temperatures shift. The sound is not alarming. It is familiar, like a building stretching in its sleep. You learn which noises matter and which do not. Sharp cracks mean splitting wood. Low groans mean shifting weight. Silence, oddly enough, can be the most worrying of all. Your thoughts drift to cabins built poorly, rushed too fast, or placed without care. Some collapsed under snow weight. Others leaked so badly they never truly warmed. Remnants found by later travelers often show extreme chinking, layers upon layers of mud and moss, evidence of desperate attempts to tame the cold after the fact. Once winter arrived, fixing mistakes became harder with every passing day. You move closer to the hearth and feel warmth return to your fingers. The contrast is stark. A few steps mean the difference between comfort and pain. That awareness sharpens your movements. Nothing is casual here. Every choice carries weight. Researchers still disagree on how long most mountain men stayed in the same winter cabin. Some suggest many moved on after a single season, abandoning structures that were never meant to last. Others point to reused sites and repaired walls as signs of repeated occupation. The remains tell conflicting stories, shaped by region and resource. You press your back against the logs and feel their cold strength. They are not friendly, but they are loyal for now. The cabin holds because you keep tending it, watching it, listening to it. Survival here is not heroic, it is maintenance. As the fire steadies again, the drafts retreat, at least for the moment. You know they will return. They always do. Winter does not give up easily, but for now, the cabin breathes quietly, and you take that small victory without celebration. The fire becomes your calendar. Not the sun, not the stars, but the way flames rise and fall tells you when to move, when to rest, and when to stay very still. You kneel and coax it back to life, blowing gently until embers glow brighter, then sliding another split log into place. The smell of fresh wood catches in your nose, sharp and comforting at once. This fire is not just warmth, it is time itself. You never let it go completely. Letting the fire die in winter is an invitation you may not be able to undo. Many period accounts make it plain that men woke to frozen cabins where relighting a fire took precious minutes. Minutes that could cost fingers or toes, so you feed it constantly, even through the night, rolling over half asleep to nudge a log into place. You keep the fire small but stubborn. A roaring blaze eats wood too quickly and fills the cabin with choking smoke. A weak fire fades into uselessness. Finding the balance takes practice. Mountain men learn to read flame color, smoke thickness, and sound. A steady crackle meant efficiency. A hiss warned of damp wood. Silence meant danger. You sit close enough to feel heat on your face while your back stays cold. The uneven warmth becomes familiar. Some men arrange their sleeping furs in a crescent around the hearth, rotating their bodies during the night like slow roasting meat. It sounds grim now, but this slow shifting helped prevent one side from freezing while the other overheated. A few journals mention this practice with dry humor, proof that necessity rewires dignity quickly. The hearth itself is crude, stones stacked without mortar, blackened by years of soot. Chimneys in these cabins were often little more than widened flues made of sticks and mud. Sparks escaped, smoke lingered. Fires sometimes backdrafted in heavy winds, filling the cabin in seconds. Surviving records describe men crawling outside on hands and knees, coughing and half blind, to clear smoke. These were not rare accidents. They were accepted risks. You keep a small pile of snow near the door, just in case. Not for drinking, for fire control. Throwing snow on runaway flames could mean the difference between a close call and losing everything. Some mountain men even slept with water buckets or damp hides within reach, though keeping liquid water unfrozen was its own challenge. Accounts differ on how often these precautions were used, but the fear behind them is consistent. You notice how the fire shapes the cabin's interior. Shadows stretch longer when flames dip. Heat pools low, leaving the upper logs rimmed with frost. You stay low, instinctively, because warmth clings near the ground. Standing too long chills you faster than sitting. This understanding did not come from theory. It came from shivering. There is a small, strange detail mentioned in one winter camp story about men talking to their fires. Not prayers exactly, more like reminders. Stay alive. Hold on. Whether this was superstition or simple loneliness is unclear, but in a place where a flame decided life, addressing it directly almost makes sense. You listen to the fire's voice now. It pops softly, then settles. That sound means the log is seated well. You adjust it slightly with a stick, never with your hands. Burns in winter heal slowly, if at all. Skin cracked by cold does not forgive heat easily. You think about the wood itself. Hardwoods burn longer and hotter, but are scarce at high elevations. Pine burns fast and leaves creosote, clogging chimneys and increasing fire risk. Most mountain men burned whatever they could get, learning through experience which species worked best for overnight coals. Notes from trading posts suggest men often preferred fir and spruce when available, a pattern supported by charcoal remains found at old cabin sites. The fire demands constant attention, but it also gives structure to your thoughts. You plan your day around it. Before leaving to check traps, you bank the coals. Before sleeping, you stack wood within arm's reach. Even your dreams seem tied to its rhythm. When it flares, you stir. When it settles, you drift. There is no clock here, but you know how long a log will last. You know when to wake before cold wakes you instead. That knowledge is learned slowly, through nights that go wrong and mornings that hurt. Some modern historians question how sustainable this constant firekeeping truly was, suggesting men must have endured nights of extreme cold regardless. Others argue the evidence of heavy charcoal buildup points to near-continuous burning. The truth likely varied, shaped by fuel supply and personal tolerance. You lean back against the wall, eyes heavy, fire steady. Outside, the world freezes deeper into itself. Inside, you remain tethered to a small circle of light and heat, guarding it as carefully as it guards you. In this cabin, fire is not comfort. It is survival, measured in glowing embers and careful breaths. You stack firewood the way other people stack money, neatly, within reach, counted again and again. Each piece represents time, minutes of warmth, a margin of safety. You kneel by the wall and run your hand over the pile, feeling bark, sap, rough grain. The smell of split wood clings to your gloves and follows you everywhere, even into sleep. Gathering fuel never truly ends in winter. You might have cut and hauled wood before snowfall, but that pile shrinks faster than you expect. Cold eats fuel greedily. Fires burn longer hours. Mistakes cost more. Men who survived these winters learned that having just enough wood was the same as having too little. Old trapping journals and trading post ledgers consistently show that winter routines revolved around fuel collection as much as food. Days were planned around how far a man could travel, how much he could haul, and how quickly darkness would erase the trail home. Wood was weight. Snow made every step heavier. Still, you went out again and again, because the alternative waited quietly inside the cabin. You remember dragging logs across crusted snow, breath rasping, shoulders burning. You learned to move slowly, deliberately, avoiding sweat. Sweat in winter was betrayal. Damp clothes stole heat once movement stopped. Many first-hand accounts warn against rushing work in cold weather, advice that reads strangely calm considering the stakes. The lesson came from pain. You split logs close to the cabin to avoid hauling smaller pieces far. The axe rang sharp in the cold air, sound travelling farther than expected. Each strike sent a vibration up your arms, numbing fingers despite thick gloves. You learned to rest often, leaning on the axe handle, listening to your heart slow before continuing. There is a curious detail mentioned in one mountain winter account about men preferring slightly damp wood for overnight burns. The belief was that it smouldered longer, holding coals through the night. Whether this worked consistently is unclear, and modern wood science might argue otherwise, but the idea reflects constant experimentation. Every winter was a lesson, and no one graded kindly. You bring the wood inside gradually. Too much stacked near the fire risks sparks and accidents. Too little means cold panic at 3 in the morning. You arrange it in layers, largest pieces at the bottom, kindling near the top. Even in exhaustion, order matters. Chaos wastes energy. Snow squeaks outside as you open the door briefly to fetch another armload. The sound feels louder than it should. Cold sharpens everything. You shut the door quickly, stamping snow from your boots. Moisture is the enemy. Melted snow turns to ice inside the cabin. Slick and dangerous. You brush it away with a stick, careful not to soak the floor. Fuel gathering also means knowing when to stop. Trees near the cabin disappear quickly, leaving you to venture farther each week. Some trappers moved their camps entirely. Once nearby, timber was exhausted. Others accepted longer walks and heavier loads. Remains of abandoned winter camps sometimes show bare rings, where every usable branch was stripped away. The landscape remembers. There is disagreement among historians about how often mountain men relocated midwinter due to fuel shortages. Some evidence suggests it was rare and dangerous. Other accounts describe men shifting camps out of necessity. The truth likely depended on snowfall, terrain, and stubbornness. You sit and warm your hands again, fire responding eagerly to fresh wood. The flames seem brighter now, more confident. That illusion matters. Morale counts when days blur together. Even small victories feel large in winter. You glance at the woodpile once more before settling down. You count logs without thinking. Tonight you are safe. Tomorrow you will count again. This constant measuring becomes second nature, as automatic as breathing. Outside, twilight fades early. Inside, the cabin holds steady. The fire hums quietly. The wood waits its turn. And you understand something deeply simple. Survival here is not dramatic. It is arithmetic. Pieces of wood, hours of heat, one careful decision stacked on another, until spring feels possible again. You sleep closer to the fire than instinct would normally allow. Not because it feels safe, but because distance equals cold, and cold steals rest one slow minute at a time. You arrange your body carefully, turning slightly on one side, then the other, testing where warmth reaches deepest. The hearth glows low and steady, painting the logs with a soft orange pulse that rises and fades like breathing. This is where sleep happens, if it happens at all. There is no bed in the modern sense. What you have is a layered compromise, a hide on the ground, furs piled thick enough to trap heat but not so thick that sparks become a danger, sometimes a rolled blanket underneath, more for padding than warmth. You lower yourself slowly, easing stiff muscles, feeling the dirt floors cold even through layers. It presses upward, reminding you that the earth does not care how tired you are. Most surviving descriptions of mountain winter camps agree on one thing. Sleeping arrangements were dictated by heat first, comfort last. Men slept where warmth reached them, not where it felt pleasant. That meant near the hearth, often uncomfortably close. Burn marks found on old cabin floors and hearthstones support this, showing how close bodies came to flames night after night. You pull furs up around your shoulders and tuck your chin down. Exposed skin is wasted heat. Your breath fogs briefly, then thins as warmth builds around your chest. The fire pops softly, a reassuring sound. You listen for it even as your eyelids grow heavy. Silence means trouble. Silence means the fire has failed you. You do not sleep deeply. Winter does not allow that. Instead, you drift in shallow waves, waking often without fully opening your eyes. You shift position when one side grows too cold or too hot. You learn to move without thought, rolling closer to the hearth, then inching away. Some trappers joked in letters that winter sleep felt like cooking yourself evenly rather than resting. Humor helped, even when the truth behind it was sharp. There is an odd detail mentioned in a few scattered journals about men sleeping, sitting up, backs against the wall, feet toward the fire. This posture reduced surface area exposed to drafts and made it easier to wake and feed the flames. Whether this was common or simply desperation varies by account. Still, you try it one night and understand why it existed. Upright sleep keeps you alert, even when exhausted. The firelight flickers across the ceiling. Soot darkens the beams. Smoke lingers, stinging your eyes until tears form and slide back toward your temples. You blink slowly. Burning eyes are a small price. You remind yourself of that. Outside, the cold is absolute. Inside, it negotiates. You wake suddenly to a change in sound. The fire has shifted. A log has settled, rolling slightly. The noise snaps you alert. Your hand reaches out before your mind fully engages, nudging the log back into place with a stick. Sparks jump, then calm. You lie still again, heart slowing, warmth returning. This reflex becomes automatic over time, like breathing or swallowing. Some period accounts describe men waking dozens of times each night to tend fires. Others suggest longer stretches of sleep were possible when fuel was plentiful. Archaeological studies of charcoal layers hint at both patterns, leaving modern researchers to piece together habits that likely varied widely. Sleep in winter was personal, shaped by resources and tolerance. You think briefly about how quiet the cabin feels despite the wind outside. Snow muffles the world. It presses against walls and roof, sealing cracks temporarily, adding insulation without asking permission. This accidental help is one of winter's small mercies. Snow that blocks your door during storms also wraps your shelter in silence, thick and heavy. You shift again, tucking your feet closer to the hearth. Boots stay on, not because they are comfortable, but because frozen leather becomes unmanageable by morning. A few trapping stories mention men waking to boots as stiff as boards, unusable without hours of careful thawing. You avoid that problem by accepting discomfort now rather than danger later. Your dreams come in fragments, images of firelight, the sound of wind, the smell of wood smoke. You dream of movement, but wake to stillness. Time stretches strangely here. Hours feel like moments. Moments feel endless. Without a clock, your body learns its own schedule, tied to heat and hunger. You stir again, half awake, half not. The fire has dimmed. You reach for another log, feed it gently, then settle back. The warmth builds slowly. Patience matters. Too much wood smothers the coals. Too little fades away. Balance returns, and with it, the fragile permission to rest. There is a small, unsettling detail noted in a few winter accounts about men waking with frost forming on their blankets, even near the fire. Breath condensed and froze where warmth thinned. You brush at a faint crust near your shoulder and feel it crumble. It does not alarm you. It informs you. The cabin is holding, but barely. You listen to the cabin itself. Logs creak softly as temperatures shift. Roof beams settle. These sounds are familiar now, no longer threatening. You learn which noises signal danger and which are simply the structure adjusting. This knowledge lets you relax just enough to drift again. Some historians suggest that this broken sleep took a toll on mountain men over long winters, dulling reflexes and clouding judgment. Others argue the human body adapts remarkably well to segmented rest, especially when survival demands it. The debate remains unresolved, shaped by limited sources and varied experiences. You wake once more, not from cold or sound, but from habit. The fire still glows. The cabin holds. Outside, the night remains deep and unmoving. You pull the furs tighter and let your breathing slow. Sleep returns in small pieces, stitched together by warmth and vigilance. It is not the sleep of safety. It is the sleep of endurance. And as you lie there, wrapped in firelight and shadow, you understand something clearly. Surviving winter here does not mean resting well. It means resting enough to wake, enough to move, enough to keep the fire alive until morning finds you still breathing. You wake with the faint awareness that something is pressing down on you. Not weight exactly, but layers, furs, blankets, hides, pulled tight in the night as your body chased warmth without asking permission. You shift slowly, careful not to scatter them. Once warmth escapes, it is slow to return. You breathe shallowly at first, letting heat gather again around your chest and shoulders. Fur is everything now. It is clothing, bedding, insulation, and sometimes shelter itself. You run your fingers through the coarse hair of a buffalo robe and feel how dense it is, how it traps air close to your skin. That trapped air is the real gift. Hair alone does nothing. Space between hairs does everything. This is something mountain men understood through experience, long before anyone used scientific language to explain it. Most first-hand winter accounts describe men sleeping beneath multiple layers, often mixing species: deer hide for flexibility, buffalo or elk for thickness, wolf or bear when available, though those came with a strong smell that never quite faded. You accept the scent. In winter, scent is irrelevant. Warmth is the only measure that matters. You adjust the layers again, making sure no gaps open along your sides. Drafts sneak in wherever skin meets air. Even a small opening can pull heat away faster than you expect. You learn to seal yourself in, curling slightly, knees bent, shoulders hunched. It is not graceful, but it works. Some mountain men added wool blankets beneath furs, believing the fabric wicked moisture away from skin. Trading post records confirm that wool was prized for winter use, often traded eagerly for pelts. Wool retained warmth even when damp, a rare quality in cold conditions. You feel the difference immediately. Where wool lies against your body, heat builds faster and stays longer. There is an unusual detail mentioned in one winter journal about men stuffing spare clothing between furs to reduce heat loss. Shirts, socks, even old rags became insulation. Whether this made a significant difference or simply offered psychological comfort is unclear, but you try it anyway. You wedge a spare shirt near your lower back and feel the cold retreat slightly. Sometimes small gains matter most. You notice how your own body becomes part of the system. Body heat is fuel. Movement generates it, but stillness preserves it. You learn to move only when necessary, conserving energy. Eating fat before sleep helps. A strip of greasy meat before lying down makes a difference you can feel an hour later. Period journals frequently mention tallow, marrow, and rendered fat as winter staples, not because they tasted good, but because they burned hot inside the body. You settle again and listen to the fire. It is steady, low, cooperative. That sound allows you to relax just a little more. You let your arms rest against your torso instead of stretching them out. Exposed limbs cool faster. You tuck hands between thighs or beneath your chest. This posture is instinctive now. Outside, the wind picks up briefly, brushing the cabin wall. Snow shifts against the logs with a soft sigh. The sound is oddly comforting. Snow pressed tight against the walls adds insulation. You know this because you have felt the difference on nights when wind scours snow away and cold pours back in. Winter gives and takes without apology. You think about nights before you learned these habits. Early mistakes linger in memory. Sleeping with one shoulder exposed, letting blankets slide away, waking shivering so hard your teeth ached. Those nights taught lessons your body remembers even if your mind drifts. Some accounts describe men sleeping together in extreme cold, sharing body heat when isolation became too dangerous. This practice appears occasionally in trapping narratives, though it is rarely discussed in detail. Pride faded quickly when survival was at stake. Whether this was common or reserved for emergencies remains uncertain, but the fact it appears at all says enough. You shift slightly closer to the hearth again. Heat radiates unevenly, strongest near the floor. You keep low. Raised cots existed, but many winter trappers avoided them unless necessary. Elevation meant exposure to colder air. Sleeping low kept you in the warmest layer the cabin could offer. You notice your breath slowing, deepening. The layers around you create a small pocket of stable warmth. Inside this pocket, your body relaxes. Muscles loosen. Thoughts soften. This is the closest thing to comfort winter allows. There is a persistent question among modern historians about how effective these bedding methods truly were in sub-zero conditions. Some argue that without modern insulation, survival relied more on fire and sheer endurance. Others point to repeated success across decades as proof that these methods worked well enough. The truth likely lies in adaptation. What worked on one night failed on another. Flexibility mattered more than perfection. You wake briefly to brush snow crystals from the fur near your face. They formed from your breath, frozen where warm air met cold hide. It looks delicate, almost decorative. You smile faintly, then tuck your chin deeper and let it be. It will melt later. The smell of fur is strong, earthy, animal. It grounds you, reminds you where warmth comes from. Every hide here represents a hunt, a risk taken earlier in the season. Nothing is wasted. Even worn spots still block wind. Even stiff sections still slow heat loss. You feel the steady presence of your own heartbeat. In winter silence, internal sounds grow louder. Breath, pulse, the faint creak of joints when you move. These sounds reassure you. They mean you are still functioning. You adjust once more, pulling the top layer higher over your neck. The fire shifts, sending a small wave of warmth across your face. You exhale slowly. The cabin holds. The layers work. For now, that is enough. Sleep returns in a smoother stretch this time. Not deep, but deeper than before. Wrapped in fur and wool, cocooned against the worst of the cold, you drift while the fire keeps its quiet watch. Surviving winter here is not about one perfect solution. It is about layers, of material, of habits, of small decisions stacked carefully together. And as you rest, sealed inside warmth borrowed from fire and fur, you understand how mountain men endured nights that would have swallowed the unprepared whole. You notice the smoke before you fully wake. It curls low, thin, and blue, drifting across the cabin instead of rising cleanly upward. Your eyes sting. Your throat tightens. You sit up slowly, blinking, already reaching for the stick you keep near the hearth. Smoke in winter is not an emergency yet, but it is a warning that demands attention. You adjust the fire gently, nudging a log so it settles better, opening a path for heat to rise. The smoke hesitates, then begins to lift, sliding reluctantly toward the chimney. You breathe easier, though the air still tastes sharp and bitter. This is normal. Clean air is a luxury few winter cabins enjoy. Cabins like this traded ventilation for warmth. Chimneys were crude, often built of sticks plastered with mud, narrowing as they rose. Drafts reversed easily when wind shifted outside. Fires that burned cleanly 1 hour could fill the room the next. Period descriptions mention eyes watering so badly that men had to sit with heads lowered, tears dripping onto their sleeves while they waited for smoke to thin. You rub your eyes with the back of your glove. The irritation fades slowly. Smoke clings to everything here. Your clothes smell of it. Your hair holds it. Even food tastes faintly of ash. Over time, you stop noticing unless it grows thick enough to interfere with breathing. There is a strange comfort in that smell. It means fire. Fire means warmth. Warmth means survival. You accept the trade without complaint. Some winter camps reportedly kept doors cracked open during daylight hours to clear smoke, even at the cost of heat. Others cut small vents near the roof. Whether these openings were planned or simply gaps that never closed properly is hard to say. Surviving cabins show irregular airflow patterns that suggest both intention and accident played a role. You crouch near the hearth and feel warmth on your face while cold still clings to your back. Smoke rolls across the ceiling, leaving black stains that spread wider each week. Those stains tell a story. They mark where fires burned longest, where men spent most of their time. Later travelers used soot patterns to judge how a cabin had been used, reading walls like quiet records. Your breathing settles again, slow, measured, shallow enough to avoid pulling too much smoke into your lungs. Mountain men learned to breathe carefully indoors, especially during storms when ventilation dropped further. Some accounts mention men stepping outside briefly just to draw a few clean breaths, braving the cold to escape choking air. There is a small detail mentioned in one trapping narrative about men chewing pine needles or spruce tips inside smoky cabins, believing it helped clear the lungs. Whether this had any real effect is uncertain, but you can imagine the sharp taste cutting through smoke, waking the senses. You consider trying it later if the air worsens. The fire flares briefly, then calms. You adjust the damper as best you can, though control is limited. This cabin was never meant to be airtight or efficient. It was meant to exist just long enough. You sit back and listen to the wind outside. It shifts, changing pressure around the chimney. Smoke responds immediately, thickening again before thinning once more. You learn to predict these changes. Wind from one direction means clear air. Another means trouble. This awareness becomes instinctive, like knowing when ice will crack beneath your weight. Smoke has other consequences. It dries eyes. It irritates skin already cracked by cold. It leaves soot that mixes with sweat and dirt, forming a gritty layer on your face and hands. You wipe your palms on your trousers and shrug. Cleanliness fades as a priority when warmth dominates everything else. Some modern researchers suggest prolonged smoke exposure likely affected lung health among mountain men, though few lived long enough or wrote clearly enough for patterns to emerge. Others argue the intermittent nature of winter camps limited damage. The evidence remains scattered, shaped by incomplete records and hard lives. You think about how smoke also served a purpose beyond heat. It discouraged insects and small animals. Mice still came, bold and persistent, but insects vanished quickly once fires burned daily. This unintended benefit mattered less in winter, but it lingered in memory from warmer months. You shift position, stretching your legs carefully. Movement stirs the air, sending smoke swirling again. You pause, letting it settle. Everything here requires patience. Quick actions create problems that linger. Your eyes drift to the walls again, to the darkened beams and streaks of soot. They are proof of countless fires, countless nights survived. Each stain represents warmth held long enough to matter. You find comfort in that thought. The smell of smoke mixes with fir and wood, forming a scent that defines winter. Years later, men wrote that catching a hint of wood smoke in towns or settlements could pull them instantly back to these cabins, to cold nights and watchful fires. Memory anchors itself to smell more than anything else. You hear a faint crack from the hearth as a log shifts again. Sparks leap, then die. You lean forward and adjust it, careful, practiced. Your hands know this work now. You no longer think about where to place wood or how to angle it. The motions flow easily, guided by experience. There is a brief moment when smoke clears almost entirely, revealing clean air and brighter firelight. You breathe deeply, enjoying it while it lasts. Moments like this never stay. Winter does not allow perfection. You settle back into your furs and let your shoulders relax. The smoke thins to a tolerable haze. Your eyes stop burning. Your breathing evens out. This balance will hold for a while. Outside, snow continues to fall, soft and relentless. It presses against the cabin, sealing cracks, muting sound. Inside, smoke drifts, fire glows, and you exist in the narrow space between suffocation and freezing. It is not ideal. It is workable. Some historians argue that enduring these conditions required a level of tolerance modern people rarely imagine. Others believe adaptation happened quickly, that the human body and mind adjusted faster than expected. Standing here now, eyes watering, lungs burning slightly, you suspect both are true. You close your eyes briefly, trusting your ears to wake you if the fire changes. Smoke becomes background again, part of the cabin's breathing. You remain alert but not tense, settled into a state winter demands. Survival here is not about eliminating discomfort, it is about choosing which discomfort you can live with. Smoke stings, but cold kills. You choose smoke, again and again, until the choice feels natural. The fire crackles softly. The cabin holds. The air, though imperfect, is enough, and you remain, steady and watchful, letting the smoke drift where it must while you focus on staying warm until daylight returns. By morning, the snow has climbed halfway up the cabin walls. You notice it the moment you open the door, a careful handspan, letting light slip inside before the cold follows. The drift presses back, firm and quiet, like the world decided to lean against you while you slept. You push gently, testing resistance, then open the door just wide enough to step out. The air outside feels heavier today, not colder exactly, but thicker, as if winter has packed itself tighter overnight. Snow crunches under your boots with a dry, brittle sound. You turn slowly, surveying the cabin from the outside, and what you see would surprise anyone who has never spent a winter like this. Snowbanks pile high along the lower logs, sealing gaps you fought against yesterday. The cabin looks smaller, partially swallowed, but it also looks warmer. Snow is an enemy, but it is also a shield. Packed against the walls, it blocks wind and slows heat loss. Men who survived multiple winters noticed this pattern and stopped shoveling snow away unless it threatened the roof or blocked the door completely. Leaving snow in place felt wrong at first, but experience taught otherwise. A cabin wrapped in snow holds warmth longer than one standing, bare against the wind. You brush powder from your sleeves and walk the perimeter slowly. The roof sheds snow well, just as planned. Most of it slides off in small avalanches, landing in soft heaps near the walls. You watch one slide free with a whisper, sending a gentle spray across the ground. That sound is reassuring. It means weight is not building where it should not. Some winter journals describe men intentionally piling snow against their cabins once storms passed, shaping drifts to act as insulation. Whether this was common practice or a trick shared among a few experienced trappers is unclear, but the idea appears often enough to suggest it worked. Snow traps air, and trapped air resists cold. Nature offers solutions if you stop fighting it long enough to notice. You take a shovel and clear a narrow path from the door, careful not to cut too deep. Digging down to bare ground invites meltwater later. Instead, you carve a shallow trench, just enough to move in and out without climbing. Snow management becomes an art. Too much removal exposes walls. Too little traps you inside. Your breath fogs thickly as you work, and sweat threatens beneath your layers. You slow down immediately. This is not the time to prove strength. You pause often, resting, letting your body cool slightly before continuing. Sweat freezes fast once movement stops. Every mountain man who survived winter learned this lesson early and never forgot it. You glance at the cabin again and notice how quiet it looks, half buried, edges softened by snow. Sound behaves differently now. Wind slides over, drifts instead of slamming into logs. The cabin feels calmer, more settled. Snow absorbs violence. It turns storms into muffled events rather than constant assaults. There is a small but telling detail mentioned in one account of a winter camp where a man carved narrow air holes through snowbanks piled against his walls, ensuring the cabin could still breathe. Whether this was necessary or simply cautious is debated, but it shows awareness of balance. Seal too tightly, and smoke and moisture build. Leave too many gaps, and cold rushes in. You step back inside and close the door, feeling the difference immediately. The cabin holds heat better today. The fire seems more effective. Drafts near the floor have eased. You sit and stretch your hands toward the hearth, appreciating this small, accidental gift winter provides. As the day passes, you monitor the roof carefully. Snow buildup can crush beams if ignored. You step outside again in the afternoon and knock loose heavy sections with a pole, sending them sliding away in controlled bursts. The work is slow, but satisfying. Each fall lightens the load overhead and resets the balance. Remains of collapsed winter cabins found decades later often show signs of neglect in this area. Roof beams bowed inward, logs split under pressure. These structures tell quiet stories of storms that outpaced attention. Whether men were away trapping, injured, or simply exhausted is impossible to know. Snow waits patiently for mistakes. You return inside, brushing snow from your boots and stamping gently to keep ice from forming on the floor. Moisture management becomes constant now. Snow melts near the fire, refreezes farther away, creating slick patches that invite falls. You scrape ice away with a knife, careful not to gouge the floor too deeply. As evening approaches, the snow outside begins to glow faintly under moonlight. The cabin feels cocooned. Sound fades further. Even the wind seems distant, a low presence rather than an active force. This quiet presses inward, calming and unsettling at the same time. Some researchers suggest this muffled environment contributed to the mental strain of winter isolation. Others argue it offered relief from constant noise and danger. Standing here, you feel both. Silence so complete makes your own thoughts louder. It also gives your nerves a chance to rest. You prepare for night again, stacking wood, checking the door, ensuring the path outside remains passable. Snow has crept closer already. You shovel just enough to keep the entrance clear. The rest you leave alone. Before sleeping, you run your hand along the inner wall, where snow presses thickest outside. The log feels less cold here. Not warm, but gentler. The difference is subtle, but real. You smile faintly. Winter has its own logic, harsh but consistent. As darkness settles, you lie near the hearth and listen. Snow shifts occasionally outside, settling, compressing, finding its place. The sound is soft, almost soothing. You pull furs closer and let your breathing slow. The cabin feels smaller tonight, but safer, wrapped in snow, sealed from wind, holding its fragile warmth a little better than before. You know this will not last forever. A thaw will come, drifts will sag and pull away. But for now, winter has accidentally strengthened your shelter. You drift towards sleep with that thought in mind. Survival here is not only about fighting the cold. Sometimes it is about letting the cold help you, just a little, in ways you never expected. Hunger arrives quietly in winter, not as a sharp pain, but as a steady thinning of strength that you notice only when tasks feel heavier than they should. You sit near the fire with a small bundle of food laid out beside you, studying it the way you study firewood. What you have must last. Guessing wrong means weakness long before spring. Most of what you eat now was prepared months ago. Dried meat hangs stiff and dark, cut thin to remove moisture before rot could take hold. Fat, rendered carefully and stored in small containers, is more valuable than lean flesh. You slice a strip of meat and chew slowly, jaw working, savoring texture rather than taste. Flavor is a memory. Fuel is reality. Winter journals from trapping regions repeatedly show that men prioritized calories over variety once snow set in. Meals became simple and repetitive. Meat, fat, sometimes a handful of dried berries saved from warmer days. Occasionally a bit of flour mixed with water and cooked near the fire into a rough cake. It was enough to keep moving, not enough to forget hunger entirely. You melt snow in a small pot, watching ice collapse into water over the coals. Liquid water is precious. Streams freeze solid. Ice must be chopped, hauled, and melted. Each step costs energy. You sip slowly, aware that too much cold water can chill you from the inside. Some men warmed water slightly before drinking for this reason, a habit mentioned casually in several accounts. There is a curious note in one winter camp story about men chewing frozen meat like hard candy, letting it soften slowly in the mouth rather than cooking it. The belief was that this preserved fat content and saved fuel. Whether this was common practice or a personal quirk is hard to say, but you try it once and understand the appeal. It saves wood, it saves time, it costs comfort. You portion your food carefully, one meal now, one later, always counting days forward, estimating how long supplies will stretch. This mental arithmetic becomes constant, even when you sleep. Part of your mind keeps tally. Hunting still happens, but it is different now. Snow makes tracks visible, but animals move less. Energy conservation rules their lives as much as yours. You rely more on traps than pursuit. Setting them required planning before winter. Choosing locations animals would still use once cold settled in. Mistakes made earlier show themselves now. You think about a snare line you checked yesterday. One rabbit. Thin, but welcome. Small victories matter. Even a little fresh meat lifts spirits. You cooked it slowly, savoring the smell as much as the nourishment. The scent of fresh food in winter feels almost unreal. Some trapping records mention men eating every usable part of an animal during winter, including organs often discarded in warmer months. This was not desperation. It was efficiency. Nothing went to waste. Even bones were cracked for marrow, boiled until they surrendered every bit of nutrition. The practice appears consistently across regions, suggesting it was standard knowledge rather than last resort. You scrape grease from a container and add it to your meal. Fat melts quickly, coating meat, adding richness. You feel its effect within an hour, warmth building more easily in your core. Calories matter more now than fullness. You stop eating before you feel satisfied. Saving food is as important as consuming it. The smell of cooking lingers briefly, then fades back into smoke and fur. You clean the pot carefully. Residue attracts mice. Mice attract larger problems. Winter guests arrive whether invited or not, and food management determines how bold they become. You tuck remaining supplies away, hanging some from rafters, burying others beneath hides. Storage is a puzzle. Keep food too close to heat and it spoils. Too far and it freezes solid. You learn the cabin's temperature zones the way you learned fire behavior. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how often mountain men actually face starvation during winter. Some argue accounts exaggerate hardship to enhance later storytelling. Others point to trade records showing consistent shortages. The truth likely varied widely. Preparation, luck, and experience decided outcomes more than bravado. You lean back and let the meal settle. Your stomach feels heavy, but your body warms. This is the balance you seek. Enough food to fuel heat without exhausting supplies. It is a careful dance repeated daily. Night approaches again. You stoke the fire and plan tomorrow's tasks around energy. Check traps close to the cabin. Gather small wood if needed. Avoid unnecessary movement. Winter punishes waste. Before lying down, you chew one last small piece of fat. It coats your mouth, unpleasant but effective. You swallow and feel comfort knowing your body will burn it slowly through the night. You wrap yourself in furs and settle near the hearth. Hunger recedes to a dull background presence. It never leaves completely. It waits, patient, reminding you not to grow careless. As sleep approaches, you understand something fundamental. Winter survival here is not about abundance. It is about control, of food, of fire, of your own impulses. Those who mastered that control lived to see thawed ground again. The fire glows steady. The cabin holds. Your body rests, fed enough to endure another cold stretch. Tomorrow you will count supplies again, measure portions again, and keep moving forward, one careful meal at a time. Morning light arrives thin and pale, slipping through the small opening that passes for a window. It does not warm anything. It simply reveals what the night left behind. You sit up slowly, joints stiff, listening first. The cabin sounds the same, fire breathing quietly, logs settled, no new groans from the roof. That is good news. Today is a hunting day, but not the kind filled with movement and chase. Winter hunting is mostly waiting, listening, reading small signs that most people never notice. You dress carefully, layering in a way that balances warmth with mobility. Too much bulk slows you. Too little invites cold into your bones. You check your gear one piece at a time. Knife sharp, traps ready, cordage untangled, ammunition, if you have any, counted again. Every item must justify its weight. Snow turns even light loads into burdens. You eat a small portion before leaving, just enough to prime your body without burning through supplies too quickly. Outside, the world feels still in a way that almost seems staged. Snow smooths everything. Tracks stand out clearly, each one a sentence written overnight. You crouch and study them near the cabin. Rabbit, fox, something heavier passed earlier, but the trail fades where wind scoured the surface. You decide not to follow that one. Energy must be spent where odds are highest. Most winter hunting relied on traps rather than pursuit, according to surviving records. Running animals through deep snow exhausted hunters faster than prey. Traps worked while you rested. They worked while you slept. That efficiency mattered more than pride. You move along your trap line slowly, stepping where previous footprints packed snow firm. Breaking new trail costs energy. Each step sinks slightly, then holds. The forest feels hushed. Snow absorbs sound, leaving only the soft scrape of your boots and the faint creak of trees shifting under cold. You reach the first trap and kneel. Empty. The bait is gone, but the mechanism untouched. A miss. You reset it patiently, adjusting placement slightly. Small changes matter. You learn that after days of failure early in the season. At the next trap, you find success. A rabbit. Still. You pause for a moment, offering a quiet acknowledgement. Not gratitude exactly. Respect. You dispatch it quickly, minimizing struggle. Cold makes everything brittle, including mercy. You work efficiently, hands numb but practiced. You secure the animal and continue. 2 more traps. One empty, one sprung but empty, likely triggered by snow weight. You reset it, making a note in your mind to adjust tension tomorrow. Winter forces constant refinement. There is a strange detail mentioned in one winter hunting account about men listening for silence rather than sound. Birds vanish from certain areas when predators linger. The absence itself becomes information. You notice that now. A stretch of woods feels empty. You move on without questioning why. As you work, you stay aware of your own body. Breathing steady, pace slow, sweat avoided. You stop often, leaning against a tree, letting heat settle. Overexertion invites disaster later, when movement stops and dampness turns to ice. You think about larger game and how rarely it appears now. Deer move less. Elk retreat to lower ground. Hunting them in winter required planning and often cooperation, something mountain men did not always have. Many relied on autumn stores to carry them through, supplementing with small game when possible. You head back toward the cabin before fatigue sets in. Turning around early feels wrong at first. You could push farther, check one more trap, but experience teaches restraint. Getting back safely matters more than squeezing out one extra chance. Back inside, the cabin welcomes you with smoke and warmth. You hang the rabbit to cool briefly, then begin cleaning it near the hearth. Steam rises as cold flesh meets warm air. The smell is sharp and immediate, filling the small space. Your stomach tightens with anticipation. You work carefully, saving every usable part. Meat set aside, organs cleaned, bones cracked later for broth. Nothing wasted. This efficiency shows up again and again in winter records, not as desperation, but as routine. As the pot warms, you think about how hunting in winter reshaped time. Days revolve around light and energy rather than opportunity. You do not hunt because you want variety. You hunt because calories equal warmth, and warmth equals survival. Some historians suggest winter hunting success varied wildly, based on region and snowfall. Others argue skill mattered more than environment. Standing here, hands working automatically, you suspect both are true. Preparation meets chance, and winter decides which one matters more on any given day. You eat later, slowly, savoring fresh meat. The taste feels almost shocking after days of dried food. It lifts your mood more than you expect. Freshness reminds you that life still moves beneath the snow, waiting. As evening returns, you clean tools and reset your mind for another night. Hunting days are tiring in a deep way. Muscles ache, eyes burn from glare and smoke, but satisfaction settles in too, quiet and steady. You stack firewood again, check the door, and settle near the hearth. Outside, the forest rests. Inside, you rest with it. Tomorrow may bring empty traps. It may bring more success. Either way, you have done what winter allows. Survival here is not heroic pursuit, it is careful listening. To land, to animals, to your own limits. And as you lie back into furs, warmth building slowly around you, you understand how mountain men endured. Not by conquering winter, but by moving through it quietly, one deliberate step at a time. You wait more than you act today. Winter teaches patience faster than anything else. The traps do the work while you conserve strength, and your role becomes observation rather than pursuit. You sit near the door with your cloak pulled tight, listening to the forest the way you listen to the fire. Quiet does not mean empty. It means information is traveling softly. Ice has crept farther along the stream overnight. Where water once moved freely, it now hides beneath a hard skin. You kneel and study the surface, tapping gently with a stick. The ice answers with a dull note, thick enough to stand on in places, too thin in others. You move carefully, testing each step, because falling through would end everything quickly. Traps set near water work differently in winter. Animals still come, drawn by the last unfrozen edges where drinking remains possible. You place snares where paths narrow, where tracks funnel movement into predictable lines. This knowledge comes from repetition. You fail often before it works. Most winter trapping success relied on understanding habits rather than strength. Animals conserve energy just as you do. They choose the easiest routes. They repeat patterns. Period accounts often emphasize this shift in thinking, noting that clever placement mattered more than quantity of traps. You find one snare holding a fox, frozen still, its fur rimmed with frost. You pause before approaching. Even lifeless, it deserves care. You remove it efficiently, hands steady despite the cold biting through gloves. The fur will be valuable later. For now, the meat matters more. You notice how cold changes everything about handling animals. Flesh stiffens quickly. Knives behave differently. Fingers lose feedback. You work slower, accepting that speed invites mistakes. You wrap the animal carefully and move on. There is an unusual detail mentioned in one winter camp letter about men placing traps beneath light snow rather than leaving them exposed. The idea was that snow softened scent and hid metal shine. Whether this increased success consistently is unclear, but you brush a thin layer over reset traps anyway. Habit becomes belief over time. You return to the cabin with your prize and hang it outside briefly to cool further. You do not bring it inside immediately. Warmth invites spoilage if you rush. Winter preserves food if you respect its rules. Inside, the fire greets you faithfully. You thaw your hands slowly, never rushing them close to heat. Sudden warmth hurts more than cold. You flex fingers gently, feeling sensation creep back like a tide. Pain follows, sharp and bright, then fades. You breathe through it. Processing the fox takes time. You skin it carefully, preserving the hide. Fur is not clothing now, but it will be. You stretch the pelt and hang it where smoke and cold will dry it evenly. This practice appears frequently in winter camp descriptions, showing how work never truly stops, even indoors. You simmer bones later, drawing out fat and nutrients. The broth warms you deeply, more than solid food alone. You sip slowly, feeling heat settle in your chest. Liquids carry warmth differently. They spread it. You think about how winter narrows choices. Everything simplifies. Eat or save, move or rest, burn wood or preserve it. Traps fit this logic perfectly. They work while you wait. They reward patience. Some historians question how reliable traps truly were in deep winter, suggesting many failed due to snow and ice. Others point to consistent fur trade records showing winter yields remained steady. Standing here, fox hides stretched and drying, you suspect traps worked often enough to matter, though never reliably enough to relax. The day drifts by quietly. Light fades early. You reset the fire, check walls, adjust chinking where frost has opened new seams. Maintenance fills gaps between meals and sleep. It keeps hands busy and mind steady. As night returns, you sit and listen again. The forest speaks softly. A branch cracks. Snow shifts. Somewhere, an animal moves cautiously. You feel connected to that rhythm now. You are part of the pattern rather than an intruder. You lie down later, satisfied but tired. Trapping days carry a different exhaustion than hunting. Less adrenaline, more focus. Your thoughts slow naturally, following the pace winter sets. As sleep approaches, you understand why mountain men favored traps when cold tightened its grip. They aligned with the season's demands. Stillness, patience, efficiency, traps turned, waiting into work, and silence into opportunity. You close your eyes and let the fire watch over you again. Tomorrow you will check lines once more. Some will be empty. Some may surprise you. That uncertainty no longer troubles you. It belongs here, part of winter's quiet bargain. You wake with a dull ache behind your eyes and a heaviness in your chest that does not belong to cold alone. Illness moves differently in winter. It does not arrive with drama. It settles in quietly, disguised as fatigue, stiffness, a throat that feels rougher than usual. You sit up slowly and listen to your breathing. Still steady, still useful. That matters. There are no doctors here, no shelves of bottles, no one to ask if this will pass or turn dangerous. What you have instead is memory, habit, and whatever knowledge you carried into these mountains. You reach for the fire first. Warmth is medicine. It does not cure, but it buys time. You sip warm water, melted carefully from clean snow. Cold water shocks the body when strength is low. Warmth soothes the throat and settles the stomach. Many winter journals mention this simple habit, offered not as advice but as fact. Men warmed what they drank because experience taught them the cost of not doing so. You check your body methodically. Fingers still flexible, toes responsive, no deep numbness. That means circulation is holding. You stretch slowly, joints protesting but obeying. Movement is careful now. Too much effort invites collapse. Too little allows stiffness to harden into weakness. Illness in winter cabins often came from small things: damp clothing, smoke irritation, poor nutrition, exhaustion layered too thick. You think back over the past days. Smoke lingered longer than usual. Sleep was broken. You ate less fresh meat. The body keeps score quietly. You reach for a small bundle of dried herbs tucked near the wall. Spruce tips, collected before winter fully set in. You crush a few between your fingers and add them to hot water. The scent is sharp and clean, cutting through smoke and fur. Whether this truly helps is uncertain, but period letters and diaries mention similar practices, often enough to show they mattered to the men who relied on them. Some accounts describe mountain men chewing willow bark for pain and fever, though evidence of its widespread use remains mixed. Others mention strong teas made from whatever green remained accessible. You use what you know, not because you are confident, but because doing nothing feels worse. You settle near the fire and let heat soak into your bones. Your breathing slows. The ache dulls slightly. That is enough for now. Winter illness is not fought, it is endured. You keep tasks small today. Check the fire, adjust the door, eat lightly, rest often. Productivity shifts when strength dips. Survival becomes priority again, stripping away everything extra. You think about how vulnerable winter made even the toughest men. Letters sent from trading posts mention trappers arriving half-blind from smoke, coughing blood, fingers ruined by frost, bodies worn thin by hunger. Not all survived. Not all wrote about it afterward. Those who did often downplayed illness, mentioning it only in passing, as if acknowledging weakness invited worse. You lie back into your furs and close your eyes for a while. Sleep comes easily now, shallow but welcome. The fire murmurs softly. The cabin holds. When you wake again, the ache has not worsened. That feels like a victory. You eat a small portion of fat, letting it melt slowly in your mouth. Energy arrives gently, like a promise rather than a surge. You stand and move through the cabin slowly, checking walls for frost, listening for drafts. Movement keeps circulation alive. Standing still too long lets cold creep back in. Balance remains everything. Some historians argue that winter illness likely claimed more lives than accidents among isolated trappers. Others believe men adapted quickly, learning to manage symptoms before they became fatal. The truth hides in gaps between records, shaped by who survived to write and who did not. You consider the possibility that illness might worsen. If it does, choices narrow fast. Stay warm, eat what you can, avoid unnecessary effort, pray quietly, if that is something you do. Winter strips belief down to instinct. You step outside briefly to draw fresh air, careful to cover your face. The cold stings but clears your head. Snow reflects pale light upward, bright enough to hurt tired eyes. You do not linger. Fresh air helps, but exposure costs energy. Back inside, you settle again. The cabin feels smaller today, closer. That can be comforting or claustrophobic depending on mood. Today, it feels protective. You listen to the fire and let time stretch. There is no hurry, Illness teaches patience even more firmly than winter itself. You learn to wait without anxiety, to notice small changes without imagining disaster. As evening returns, you feel steadier, not strong, but stable. That is enough to sleep. You feed the fire carefully, stack wood within reach, and arrange your furs more deliberately than usual. You lie down and pull layers tight. Breathing remains even. Pain fades into background awareness. You let it exist without resistance. Surviving illness here does not feel heroic. It feels quiet and fragile. But when morning comes again, and you can sit up without dizziness, you recognize what it means. You endured another test winter offered without warning. As sleep finally deepens, you understand something mountain men learned early. Strength is not proven by ignoring weakness. It is proven by adjusting to it, patiently, until the body finds its balance again. The fire glows. The cabin holds. Your breath moves in and out, steady once more. For now, winter loosens its grip, just enough to let you rest. Darkness arrives early now, not with drama but with a quiet certainty that feels heavier each day. You notice it when shadows stop moving and simply settle, as if the world decided to rest all at once. The fire becomes the only sun you recognize, shrinking the cabin into a small circle of light surrounded by endless night. You sit close to the hearth, hands resting on your knees, watching flames lick upward and disappear into smoke. Beyond the walls, the forest fades into something abstract. You cannot see it, only imagine it. Trees stand frozen. Snow lies untouched. Animals move cautiously, guided by instincts sharper than thought. You remain still, listening for sounds that rarely come. Long winter nights change the way time feels. Hours stretch thin and wide, bending perception. Without clocks, your body learns new measures. Hunger marks one passage, fatigue another. Firewood consumption becomes a rough gauge of how long you have been awake. When a log burns down faster than expected, you realize the night still has far to go. You talk to yourself sometimes, not loudly, not in full sentences. Small comments, reminders, questions left unanswered. It is not madness, it is company. Many winter accounts hint at this habit without naming it directly, mentioning men muttering while working or speaking aloud to no one in particular. Isolation reshapes behavior in subtle ways. You think about faces you have not seen in weeks, voices remembered imperfectly, laughter that feels distant now. The cabin holds you, but it also separates you from everything else. This separation is both protection and burden. You pace slowly, careful not to waste energy. Movement keeps blood flowing and mind occupied. You straighten a pile of wood that does not need straightening. You adjust furs already arranged. Small tasks become anchors, preventing thoughts from drifting too far. The silence presses in again. Snow absorbs sound so completely that even the wind seems muted. When a branch cracks outside, the noise startles you more than it should. Your senses sharpen in response to emptiness. You hear your own breathing louder than the forest. Some men reportedly sang quietly during winter nights, simple tunes remembered from childhood or made up on the spot. Others whittled small objects from scrap wood, shaping something familiar just to feel useful. Whether these habits were widespread or personal varies by account, but the need behind them feels universal. You pick up a small piece of wood and begin carving absent-mindedly. The knife moves slowly, carefully. Shavings fall to the floor, pale against dirt. The motion calms you. It gives your hands something to do while your thoughts wander less dangerously. Loneliness arrives in waves. Sometimes it stays distant, barely noticeable. Other times it presses close, heavy and uncomfortable. You let it come and go without judgment. Fighting it wastes energy. Accepting it makes it manageable. You lie back briefly, staring at the ceiling where soot patterns form uneven constellations. Each stain marks a fire burned through another night. You imagine how many hours of wakefulness those marks represent. How many men sat where you sit now, listening to the same quiet, feeling the same mix of calm and unease. There is debate among historians about how isolation affected mountain men psychologically. Some argue the lifestyle selected for individuals already comfortable with solitude. Others suggest the toll was significant, masked by sparse records and cultural expectations of toughness. Sitting here alone, you suspect both arguments hold truth. Solitude sharpens some minds and erodes others. You close your eyes and focus on the fire's sound. Crack, settle, soft hiss. It becomes a rhythm you can lean on. You breathe in time with it, letting tension drain slowly. Outside, night deepens. Stars would be brilliant if you could see them, sharp and cold, but clouds have rolled in again, hiding the sky. Snow begins to fall softly, adding to the silence rather than breaking it. You think about morning, about tasks waiting, checking traps, gathering wood, small routines that give shape to time. Anticipation helps. It pulls you forward, away from the endlessness of night. You feed the fire again and sit back down. The warmth spreads unevenly, but enough. You wrap your cloak tighter and let your shoulders drop. Sleep comes in short stretches. You drift, wake, drift again. Dreams blur into waking thoughts. Images repeat. Firelight, snow, faces without names. You accept this rhythm. Fighting it leads nowhere. At one point, you wake and feel an unexpected calm. Not happiness, not relief, simply acceptance. This is the night. This is the cabin. This is your life for now. The simplicity of that realization steadies you. You think about why mountain men stayed out here despite the hardship. Profit, freedom, habit, pride. The reasons varied, but winter tested them all equally. Those who endured found meaning not in comfort, but in capability. You listen again. The cabin creaks softly as temperatures shift. It sounds alive, adjusting, holding. You feel a strange sense of partnership with it. You maintain it. It shelters you. Together, you face winter. As dawn finally approaches, the darkness loosens its grip slightly, not with light yet, but with a subtle change in air. You sense it before you see it. The fire burns low. You add one last log and lie back, letting warmth gather. The long night did not defeat you. It never does outright. It wears you down slowly, testing patience more than strength. Tonight, you pass that test by simply remaining. You close your eyes again as the cabin settles into early morning stillness. Another night endured, another quiet victory earned without witnesses. You wake to a strange quiet that feels different from the silence of night. This quiet carries daylight inside it, a softer weight, less tense. Morning has arrived without announcing itself. You sit up slowly and feel stiffness settle into your joints like a reminder that rest here is never complete. Your breath fogs faintly in the air, thinner than before. The fire has faded to coals, but the cabin still holds enough warmth to matter. Today, you move differently. Not slower, not faster, just more deliberately. Fatigue has a way of sharpening focus when you learn to respect it. You stretch your arms and legs carefully, testing each movement before committing. Pain answers in a dull, manageable way. That means you can work. Your first task is always the same. Fire. You stir the coals and feed them patiently. Flames catch, weak at first, then stronger. The sound steadies you. This ritual anchors the day before anything else can interfere. As light strengthens outside, you open the door briefly and step into the snow. The air feels cleaner than it did yesterday. Cold still bites, but it no longer surprises you. You look around slowly, scanning the familiar shapes of trees, drifts, and shadows. Nothing appears out of place. That too is good news. You decide today will be about movement, not distance, but circulation. Winter punishes stillness as much as recklessness. You gather tools and step out again, following a short loop around the cabin. You keep your pace easy, breathing steady. Muscles warm gradually, sending heat outward where it is needed most. You check the roof again, knocking loose a small buildup of snow. It slides away obediently. The sound feels satisfying, like a problem resolved before it grows. Many winter failures begin with ignoring small things. You refuse to let that happen. You head toward the woodpile next, selecting pieces carefully. Splitting a few logs now will save effort later. You raise the axe slowly, letting gravity do more work than muscle. The blade bites cleanly. The sound echoes briefly, then fades. You pause between strikes, leaning on the handle, letting your heart slow. Sweat must be avoided. You work in measured bursts, stopping often. There is a detail noted in several winter camp descriptions about men favoring slow, repetitive labor during cold months. The idea was not to finish tasks quickly, but to maintain warmth without exhaustion. That rhythm suits you now. You settle into it easily. As you work, your mind drifts to thoughts of the body itself, how it changes under constant cold. Fingers thicken slightly, skin toughens, sensitivity dulls. Pain becomes information rather than alarm. This adaptation shows up repeatedly in period writing, often mentioned casually, as if it were expected. You bring the split wood inside and stack it neatly. Order matters here. It keeps your mind clear and prevents accidents. A loose log can roll. A misplaced piece can block movement when speed suddenly matters. You have learned to think this way without effort. Later, you step out again to check traps close to the cabin. The farther line can wait. Conservation of energy remains the rule. You move along familiar paths, stepping where snow has hardened. Each footprint feels intentional now. You find one trap sprung and empty. Another holds a small animal. You remove it efficiently, resetting the trap with practiced hands. You feel no surge of excitement, just quiet satisfaction. Winter rewards consistency more than luck. As you work, you notice how your breathing remains steady. No dizziness, no tightness. The illness from earlier days has loosened its grip. You do not celebrate. You simply note the change and adjust expectations slightly upward. There is discussion among historians about how recovery from illness played out in isolated winter camps. Some believe minor sickness often resolved on its own, given warmth and rest. Others argue many men died quietly from conditions that would be easily treated today. The truth remains uneven, shaped by who lived long enough to leave a record. You return to the cabin and begin processing the catch. The work warms you further. You move carefully, conserving energy but staying engaged. Your hands remember the steps, even when your mind drifts. Muscle memory becomes a form of intelligence here. You cook lightly and eat slowly, listening to your body's response. Strength returns gradually, not all at once. You stop before feeling full. Control remains essential. As afternoon fades, you feel the familiar pull of evening approaching. Light shifts, shadows lengthen. You prepare the cabin again, checking walls, sealing new cracks where frost has worked seams apart. This maintenance never ends. It defines survival more than any single dramatic act. You sit near the fire and let your shoulders relax. Fatigue settles deeper now, but it feels earned rather than oppressive. Your mind feels clearer than it has in days. Routine has done its work. You think about how winter strips life down to essentials. Movement, warmth, food, shelter. Everything else fades into background noise. This simplicity can feel harsh or freeing depending on the moment. Tonight, it feels grounding. Some modern interpretations paint mountain men as reckless or romantic. The reality, revealed in quiet routines like this, shows something else entirely. Survival depended on discipline more than daring. Those who lasted learned when to push and when to pause. You lie down as night returns, arranging furs carefully. The fire burns steady. You feel warmth gather more easily now, a sign your body has regained balance. You breathe deeply and let your eyes close. Tomorrow will bring more of the same. Wood to split, traps to check, fire to tend. This repetition no longer feels heavy. It feels reliable. As sleep takes hold, you understand something important. Winter does not demand constant struggle. It demands consistency. Those who meet that demand quietly often endure longer than those who fight loudly. The cabin creaks softly. Snow settles outside. Your breath slows. You rest, knowing you have adapted once again, just enough to keep moving forward through the cold. You notice it first in the way your thoughts circle back on themselves. The same idea appears, leaves, then returns again a few minutes later, unchanged. Winter solitude does that. It does not shout, it repeats. You sit near the fire, carving another thin curl from a scrap of wood, and realize you have been shaping the same piece for far longer than necessary. The cabin is quiet enough that you can hear your own movements echo slightly. The scrape of the knife, the shift of your weight on the dirt floor. Even your breathing sounds louder than it should. When you stop moving, the silence rushes in to fill the space, thick and immediate. You stand and pace slowly, counting steps without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, turn. The cabin is small, but walking its length helps your mind settle. Stillness invites thoughts to wander too far, and wandering thoughts can grow heavy in winter. Many men who spent long winters alone wrote very little about loneliness directly. Instead, they mentioned habits, talking aloud, singing quietly, giving names to tools. These details appear scattered across journals and letters, small clues to a larger reality. Solitude reshapes behavior before it announces itself. You catch yourself speaking under your breath as you tend the fire. Just a comment, an observation. The flame responds with a soft crackle, and for a moment, it feels like a conversation. You smile faintly and let it be. There is no harm in it. Out here, anything that steadies the mind earns its place. You think about time differently now. Days blur together. Without visitors or news, nothing marks one from the next, except subtle shifts in light and weather. You start remembering events not by date, but by sensation. The day the wind howled. The night the fire nearly failed. The morning snow sealed the door, halfway shut. You sit back down and let the firelight wash over your hands. Skin looks rougher than it did weeks ago. Cracks along the knuckles have healed into calluses. This is not neglect. It is adaptation. The body changes to match conditions, just as the mind does. There is an old account from a winter trapper who wrote that after weeks alone, he felt uneasy when another man finally arrived at his camp. The presence disrupted a rhythm he had grown used to. Whether that reaction was common or unusual remains debated, but it suggests solitude can become familiar, even comforting, in its own way. You test that idea now. The thought of voices feels distant, almost intrusive, not unpleasant, but unfamiliar. The cabin has become a private world with its own rules and pace. You know every sound it makes, every draft, every smell. That knowledge brings calm. Still, isolation has edges. At times, memories surface uninvited, conversations replay, regrets appear sharper in the quiet. You let them pass without chasing them. Winter does not reward introspection that leads nowhere. It rewards presence. You occupy your hands again, repairing a strap on your pack. The leather is stiff, but workable. You warm it slightly near the fire, careful not to scorch it. Simple repairs like this fill hours and prevent future problems. They also keep your thoughts grounded in the present. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft and steady. The sound is barely audible, more a sense than a noise. You feel the cabin grow quieter, wrapped once more. The isolation deepens, but so does the sense of protection. You open the door briefly and look out. The world appears smaller now, reduced to a few familiar shapes. Trees fade into white, tracks blur. You close the door and return inside, carrying that image with you. The boundary between you and the world feels firm, intentional. Some historians argue that men drawn to this life already possessed a tolerance for solitude. Others suggest solitude was learned, not innate, shaped by necessity. Sitting here now, you sense truth in both ideas. Preference matters. Practice matters more. You lie down for a while, not to sleep, but to rest your mind. You stare at the ceiling, tracing soot patterns again. They shift as the fire flickers, creating the illusion of movement. This small entertainment holds your attention longer than it should. In winter, the simplest things expand to fill time. You think about spring sometimes, not with excitement, but with curiosity. What will it feel like to hear water running again? To smell damp earth instead of smoke and fur? These thoughts remain gentle, distant. Fixating on the future distracts from the present, and the present demands care. You sit up again and add a log to the fire. Sparks jump briefly, then settle. The cabin brightens, shadows retreat. Light pushes back isolation for a moment. You breathe deeply and feel your chest rise easily. That matters. You realize that solitude has sharpened your awareness. You notice changes sooner. A draft that did not exist yesterday. A sound that feels out of place. A subtle shift in temperature. These signals guide decisions before problems grow serious. In this way, isolation becomes a tool rather than a threat. There is ongoing discussion among modern scholars about whether prolonged solitude improves or degrades judgment. Some point to enhanced focus and self-reliance. Others highlight increased risk of error and emotional strain. Both outcomes appear possible, shaped by individual temperament and circumstance. You glance at the door again, then at the walls, then at the fire. Everything is in order. That reassurance settles your mind more than company ever could right now. As night returns, you prepare the cabin again, repeating familiar steps. Stack wood, check the latch, arrange furs. The repetition itself becomes comforting. Predictability counters loneliness better than distraction. You lie down and pull layers close. The fire hums quietly. Outside, snow continues its slow work, reshaping the world inch by inch. Inside, you exist within a steady rhythm, neither rushed nor stagnant. You think less now. That feels like progress. Thoughts slow and spread out, leaving space between them. In that space, calm grows. Isolation has not defeated you. It has altered you, sharpened edges, softened others. You remain aware, grounded, capable. As sleep approaches, you accept the quiet fully, not as absence, but as presence. A wide, empty field where nothing demands your attention except survival itself. And tonight, that feels manageable. You notice the weight of your tools more than usual today. Not heavier in truth, but more present in your awareness. Every object in this cabin has earned its place. Nothing sits idle without reason. Knife, axe, rifle, if you still have powder left. Each one is simple, worn, and unforgiving if neglected. You begin the morning by checking them one by one, a quiet ritual that keeps small failures from becoming final ones. You run your thumb carefully along the knife's spine, never the edge, sharp enough, still true. You wipe it clean and oil it lightly, knowing rust never sleeps in damp winter air. Even cold cannot fully stop corrosion. Tools behave differently in winter. Metal bites skin faster. Wood handles stiffen and crack if left near heat too long. You rotate them, warming them slowly, never rushing. Sudden temperature changes ruin good steel and split old hafts. This patience shows up again and again in winter accounts, not as advice but as habit. You lift the axe and feel its balance. A chipped edge would glance dangerously off frozen knots. A loose head could slip at the worst moment. You tap the handle against the floor and listen. The sound is solid. That reassures you more than sight ever could. There is a lesser-known detail mentioned in a few winter journals about men sleeping with their knives close, not out of fear, but practicality. Frozen leather sheaths stiffen, blades left far from heat become difficult to draw quickly. You understand this now. Accessibility matters more than order. You sit and sharpen slowly, letting the stone sing softly under steel. The sound is steady and calming. Each stroke removes just enough material to matter. Over-sharpening wastes metal. Under-sharpening invites accidents. Balance again. You think about how much survival depends on objects that would look crude to modern eyes. No backups, no replacements. If something breaks, you fix it or do without. Many men carried spare handles or improvised repairs from antler, rawhide, or scrap wood. Archaeological finds show tools repaired again and again, evidence of stubborn persistence rather than abundance. You test your rifle next, careful and deliberate. Powder kept dry, mechanism free of ice. A misfire in winter wastes more than time. It wastes energy and morale. You clean what you can, knowing that oil thickens in cold and excess lubrication attracts grit. You use just enough. Some historians argue that winter equipment failures caused as many deaths as cold itself. Others believe experienced trappers adapted quickly, choosing simpler gear that failed less often. Looking at your own tools now, worn but reliable, you suspect simplicity won this argument long ago. You check clothing next. Buckskin patched where it wore thin, stitching reinforced at stress points. You warm leather near the fire until it softens, then work it with your hands. Leather care is survival care. Cracked clothing invites wind. Wind steals heat faster than hunger steals strength. There is an odd note in one trapping letter about men rubbing animal fat into boots to keep them flexible through winter. The smell lingered, but the boots lasted. You do the same, working grease into seams and soles. The scent mixes with smoke and fur, becoming part of the cabin's identity. You step outside briefly to test your footing. Snow has crusted slightly overnight. Boots grip well enough. You walk a short distance and return. No reason to push farther today. This is a maintenance day, not a movement day. Inside again, you hang damp items where smoke and warmth will dry them evenly. Too close to the fire scorches, too far leaves moisture trapped. You adjust placement carefully, watching steam rise and fade. Dry gear means warmer nights. You sit back and consider how fragile this balance really is. One broken tool, one torn boot, one snapped strap. Any of these could shift winter from manageable to deadly. That awareness keeps you attentive without making you anxious. Worry wastes energy. Preparation preserves it. Some scholars debate how standardized mountain men's gear truly was, suggesting many relied on personal preference rather than shared knowledge. Others point to repeated patterns across regions that hint at an informal consensus. Sitting here with your tools laid out, you see both. Each item reflects personal history, shaped by shared experience. You repair a loose strap on your pack, stitching slowly with practiced hands. Needlework in cold requires patience. Fingers lose fine control quickly. You pause often, warming them, then continue. This task could wait, but finishing it now prevents frustration later. The fire burns steady, The cabin feels orderly. That order matters more than comfort. It creates confidence. When everything has a place and functions as expected, your mind rests easier. As afternoon light fades, you store tools carefully, placing them where you can reach them easily, even in darkness. You test paths between hearth and door, making sure nothing blocks movement. In emergencies, seconds matter. You think about accidents that winter magnifies: slipping on ice, cutting frozen wood too fast, dropping metal onto bare skin. Each mistake compounds quickly in cold. Awareness becomes armor. You eat lightly and drink warm water, then return to the hearth. The day has been quiet but productive. Nothing dramatic happened. That is the goal. There is an ongoing discussion among modern historians about whether winter survival depended more on skill or luck. Some emphasize preparation and knowledge. Others highlight unpredictable variables like storms and illness. You suspect winter does not care about the distinction. It tests everything equally. You lie down as night returns, tools nearby, fire steady. You feel a deep, practical satisfaction settle in. Everything works. Everything holds. Survival here is not about heroics. It is about systems, tools that do their job, hands that know how to use them, a mind that notices problems early. As sleep approaches, you run through tomorrow's needs once more. Check traps, split a little wood, maintain the fire, simple plans, clear priorities. The cabin creaks softly. Snow settles outside. Your tools rest where you can reach them. You close your eyes, confident that if winter challenges you again tomorrow, you will meet it with preparation rather than panic. You hear it before you see it, a faint scratching sound near the wall, soft enough that you almost mistake it for the cabin settling. You stay still, listening. The sound comes again, followed by a brief pause, then another, rhythmic, intentional. You smile faintly, because you already know what it is. Winter brings guests whether you want them or not. You shift slowly and look toward the corner where the wall meets the floor. A small shadow moves, then freezes. A mouse, bold from hunger and cold, nose twitching as it tests the air. It has learned the same lesson you have. Warmth matters, food matters, and this cabin offers both. Rodents are a constant presence in winter camps. Trappers wrote about them casually, almost fondly at times, noting how they appeared as soon as snow deepened. Where humans stored food, animals followed. The mountains offered little mercy to small creatures in winter, and cabins became rare islands of opportunity. You do not panic. Panic wastes energy. You simply watch. The mouse darts forward, grabs a crumb you did not realize you dropped, and vanishes back into the shadows. Efficient, focused, you respect that. You tighten the wrap around your food bundle and hang it higher, adjusting the cord carefully. Storage becomes a negotiation rather than a solution. Mice climb. They chew. They persist. You learn to limit damage rather than eliminate the problem entirely. There is a small detail mentioned in several winter journals about men keeping cats at camps when possible, though most mountain men did not. A few trading posts reportedly had half-wild cats that thrived in winter quarters, living well on scraps and rodents. Out here, alone, you rely on vigilance instead. The scratching sound moves along the wall, then fades. You return your attention to the fire. Guests come and go. That is the rule. Later, you hear something heavier, not scratching, thumping, a muffled bump against the outer wall, followed by a pause. You tense slightly, listening. The sound comes again, then stops. Likely a rabbit or fox nosing around the snowbank, drawn by scent or curiosity. Larger animals rarely approach closely in winter, but hunger changes behavior. You do not reach for your weapon. Not yet. Most visitors mean no harm if left undisturbed. You stay quiet and let the moment pass. Eventually, the sound fades into the larger silence outside. Cabins attract life in winter. Birds perch on roofs for shelter from wind. Weasels slip through gaps chasing mice. Insects vanish, but signs of them remain. Eggs waiting for warmth that will not come for months. Even snakes have been reported sheltering beneath cabin floors in milder regions, though that detail appears rarely and remains uncertain. You remember reading a trapping account where a man woke to find a porcupine chewing the salt from his axe handle. The animal had followed the scent of sweat and minerals, indifferent to human presence. You glance at your tools now, grateful they remain untouched. You adjust your gear placement slightly, moving leather items away from walls. Rodents chew for nesting material as much as food. Prevention is easier than repair. As night deepens, the cabin grows quieter again. The fire crackles softly. You relax, knowing that these intrusions are part of the landscape rather than threats. You are not alone here. No one truly is. Some historians argue that close contact with animals in winter camps shaped mountain men's attitudes toward wildlife, fostering a sense of coexistence rather than dominance. Others believe necessity overrode sentiment entirely. Sitting here, listening to a mouse move somewhere beneath the floor, you feel neither affection nor hostility, only understanding. You lie down and pull furs closer, listening as your own breathing blends with the small sounds around you. The cabin becomes a shared space at night, occupied by many lives moving cautiously through the cold. You wake later to another sound, louder this time, a scrape along the doorframe. You sit up slowly, heart steady. You reach for the stick you keep nearby and tap the door once. Firm, not aggressive. The sound outside stops immediately. Whatever was there decides against further investigation. You wait, listening. Silence returns. You lie back down. There are limits to coexistence. You defend your space without drama. Most animals understand boundaries when they are clearly stated. Morning comes quietly. You open the door and find fresh tracks near the cabin. Small ones, larger ones crossing farther out. Stories written in snow that vanished once the sun rises. You study them briefly, then let them go. You sweep the floor and find small droppings near the wall. You clean them away without irritation. Cleanliness here is not about comfort. It is about health. You wash your hands carefully afterward, using warm water and ash. Routine matters. You notice how these small interactions with animals sharpen awareness. You store food better. You listen more carefully. You notice patterns in movement and sound. Winter teaches attention through repetition. Some modern scholars speculate that these constant low-level interactions helped keep isolated men mentally engaged, providing stimulation when human contact was absent. Others see them simply as unavoidable nuisances. You see them as signals. Life continues even in the cold. As evening returns, you hear the mouse again, faint and quick. It keeps its distance now. You smile faintly and feed the fire. The cabin holds. The night settles. You are not alone, but you are not threatened. Winter has gathered many lives into this small pocket of warmth, each moving carefully, each trying to endure. You lie back and let your breathing slow. Outside, snow continues its quiet work. Inside, life continues in small, shared ways. And in this balance between vigilance and acceptance, you find another way winter teaches survival. The storm announces itself before it arrives. The air grows heavy, pressing inward, and the silence outside feels thicker than usual. You sense it while sitting near the fire, a tightening in the space around the cabin that has nothing to do with temperature. You rise and move instinctively, beginning preparations without fully naming the threat yet. You step outside and look up. The sky hangs low and pale, clouds stacked thick and unmoving. Snow begins as a fine drift, almost polite, then grows denser within minutes. Wind follows shortly after, sliding through trees and over ridges with a low, persistent sound. This will not be a passing flurry. This is a storm that plans to stay. You return inside and close the door firmly. The latch holds. You check it twice anyway. Storms test small weaknesses first, then exploit them. You stack additional wood near the hearth, choosing longer burning pieces. Tonight will demand attention. The fire becomes central again. You build it up slowly, creating a strong bed of coals rather than tall flames. Smoke thickens briefly, then steadies. You adjust airflow with practiced movements, listening as much as watching. The fire responds well. That matters. Outside, wind strengthens. It rattles branches and sends loose snow skimming across the ground. Soon, it finds the cabin, pressing against walls and roof with a steady insistence. The sound is not violent yet, but it is constant, a reminder that winter is capable of far more. You move through the cabin, checking everything. Walls, roof beams, chinking, door seams. You push mud into a small crack you had not noticed earlier, sealing it as best you can before the cold hardens it beyond usefulness. Maintenance becomes urgency when storms approach. You think about how storms shaped winter survival more than any single cold night. Journals from trapping regions often mention blizzards as turning points. Supplies lost, cabins damaged, men delayed for days, sometimes weeks. Survival during storms depended less on skill in the moment and more on preparation beforehand. You finish your checks and sit near the hearth, listening. Snow begins to strike the walls in soft waves, a sound like distant surf. Wind picks up again, testing the roof. Logs creak, but they hold. You keep your body low and relaxed, conserving energy. There is an unusual detail mentioned in one winter account about men tying ropes from door to nearby trees before storms, ensuring they could find their way back if forced outside. You consider this briefly, then decide against it. Leaving the cabin during a storm is a last resort. Better to stay put unless fire or collapse forces your hand. You eat a small meal early, choosing fat over volume. Energy stored now will matter later when movement becomes difficult. You drink warm water and settle back in, arranging furs carefully. Comfort is secondary. Accessibility matters. You need to reach the fire without standing fully if necessary. As the storm deepens, sound changes. Wind no longer slides, it pushes. Snow strikes harder, finding every surface. The cabin responds with deeper groans, wood adjusting under shifting pressure. You listen closely, separating harmless noises from warning signs. Sharp cracks mean stress, low creaks mean adjustment. So far, the sounds fall into the second category. You keep the fire steady and small. Too much heat creates rapid expansion and contraction in the logs. That can open gaps or loosen joints. Balance remains everything, even now. You think about men caught outside during storms like this. Accounts mention disorientation within minutes. Snow erases landmarks. Wind steals breath. Even experienced travelers lost their way within sight of shelter. Those stories keep you seated firmly inside. There is disagreement among historians about how often mountain men successfully traveled during winter storms. Some narratives suggest remarkable endurance. Others emphasize how many never returned. The truth likely depends on conditions, preparation, and luck. Tonight, you choose caution. The storm peaks, sometime after night fully settles. Wind roars now, loud enough to drown out smaller sounds. Snow piles against the cabin, pushing hard. You feel the walls flex slightly under pressure. You add more wood to the fire, not to heat faster, but to maintain consistency. Sudden drops in temperature inside could encourage ice formation where you least want it. You remain awake through the worst of it, feeding the fire regularly, listening, waiting. Time stretches oddly during storms. Without visual cues, minutes blur into long, uncertain spans. You count logs burned to estimate passing hours. 3 logs. 4. 5. The fire remains strong. At one point, a heavy thump strikes the roof. You tense briefly, then relax. Likely a chunk of snow sliding free, not a beam failing. You wait, listening for follow-up sounds. None come. You exhale slowly and return your focus to the hearth. Some trappers reportedly prayed during storms, quietly or aloud. Others focused on tasks to keep fear from growing. You choose the latter. You sharpen a stick absent-mindedly. You adjust furs. You count supplies again. These small actions keep your mind anchored. Gradually, the wind begins to lose strength. Not suddenly, but in steps. Gusts grow shorter. Snowfall lightens. The pressure against the walls eases slightly. You notice these changes without celebrating. Storms sometimes pause before returning stronger. You wait. Eventually, quiet returns in pieces. Wind fades to a low sigh. Snow falls softly again, no longer driven sideways. The cabin settles, creaks diminishing. You remain still for a while longer, just in case. Winter rewards patience even after danger seems to pass. When you finally lie back, exhaustion arrives all at once. Not physical tiredness, but a deep mental fatigue from hours of vigilance. You pull furs tight and let your breathing slow. The fire burns steady. The cabin holds. Morning arrives late, filtered through heavy cloud cover. You open the door cautiously and find snow piled high again, deeper than before. The storm has reshaped everything. Paths erased. Drifts formed where none existed. The cabin stands firm, partially buried, but intact. You take a slow walk around it, checking roof and walls. Everything holds. Snow packed against the logs adds insulation again. You shovel only what is necessary to clear the door and vents. The rest you leave alone. You stand for a moment, looking out over a world made new by the storm. Quiet, white, still. The danger has passed, leaving behind both beauty and challenge. You return inside and sit near the hearth, letting warmth soak back in. The storm tested your shelter, your preparation, your patience. You passed not by fighting it, but by enduring quietly. Winter storms do not ask for bravery. They demand respect. Today, you gave it, and the cabin still stands. That is enough. You wake to a cold that feels different from the nights before. It is not sharper, not stronger, just closer. You sit up and notice it immediately. Frost has formed inside the cabin. Tiny white crystals cling to the lower logs and trace delicate lines along the floor where moisture settled and froze before dawn. The sight is oddly beautiful and quietly unsettling. Ice indoors means the balance shifted overnight. The fire held, but only just. You move carefully, mindful of slick patches beneath your boots. A fall here would be clumsy at best and dangerous at worst. You crouch near the hearth and stir the coals, coaxing them back to strength. Flames answer slowly, then with more confidence. Warmth begins to push back against the creeping cold. Indoor frost was not unusual in winter cabins. Many period descriptions mention waking to ice inside shelters, sometimes thick enough to crunch underfoot. This detail appears so often in winter journals that it feels almost expected. Cabins held warmth imperfectly, and winter exploited every weakness. You stretch your hands toward the fire and watch frost recede from nearby surfaces. It melts in thin lines, forming droplets that darken the wood before evaporating into steam. Moisture cycles endlessly here. Breath, snow, fire, freeze, melt, freeze again. Managing this cycle becomes a daily task. You scrape ice gently from the floor using a flat piece of wood. Metal would gouge the surface and create deeper pockets where water could collect later. You work slowly, mindful of your footing. Ice does not forgive haste. As you move, you think about how cold changes the body's priorities. Comfort fades quickly. Mobility becomes essential. Keeping joints loose matters more than staying cozy. You stretch deliberately, rotating shoulders, flexing knees, coaxing circulation back into stiff limbs. Pain fades into a manageable background hum. You check the walls again, pressing new mud into gaps where frost has forced seams apart. This work feels endless. Logs expand and contract constantly. Each temperature shift opens something new. Cabins survive winter not because they are solid, but because they are constantly tended. You notice frost along the underside of the roof as well, thin and feathery. It tells you warm air rose and condensed against cold wood overnight. You open the door briefly to exchange air, letting some moisture escape at the cost of heat. The trade is worth it. Trapped moisture invites rot and mold once temperatures rise again. Some winter accounts mention men intentionally opening doors or vents briefly on the coldest mornings to clear moisture. Others avoided this practice, fearing heat loss more than long-term damage. The debate remains unresolved, but you trust what you can see. Frost indoors is a message. You respond. You eat lightly and drink warm water, careful not to spill. Any liquid that hits the floor will freeze quickly away from the hearth. You wipe your hands dry and pull on layers with more care than usual. Damp fabric becomes rigid in minutes. As daylight strengthens, you step outside to check conditions. The storm has passed, but its work remains. Snow is deeper now. Drifts have hardened into crusts that support weight in some places and collapse in others. You test each step carefully, listening to the snow's response. It answers with a hollow crunch that tells you where it will hold. Back inside, you tend the fire again and sit near the warmth, letting your body settle. You feel the chill retreat gradually, though not completely. Winter leaves traces even after you push it back. You accept that. There is discussion among historians about how much time mountain men spent managing cold rather than actively hunting or trapping during winter. Some argue most energy went towards simple survival tasks, like fire tending and cabin maintenance. Others believe men balanced these duties efficiently. Standing here, scraping frost and sealing cracks, you see how much effort disappears into holding ground rather than gaining it. You think about how frost indoors signals more than temperature. It signals time passing. As winter deepens, nights grow longer and colder. Firewood burns faster. Food supplies shrink. Margins tighten. Frost is a reminder to adjust expectations, to conserve a little more, to move a little less. You shift closer to the hearth and watch your breath fade as warmth builds. The cabin responds slowly, but it responds. That matters. You lay a hide near the coldest wall to add insulation where frost appeared thickest. Small changes like this add up. You notice how your awareness sharpens in response to discomfort. Every sensation becomes information. A cold patch on your back means a draft. A slick spot on the floor means condensation. Winter teaches attention through consequence. Later in the day, frost returns in smaller patches, forming and melting as temperatures fluctuate. You track it almost absent-mindedly, learning the cabin's behavior under changing conditions. This knowledge builds quietly, one observation at a time. Some accounts describe men waking to icicles hanging from interior roof beams during extreme cold snaps. You glance upward, half expecting to see them, but find only damp wood and soot. The cabin still holds enough warmth to prevent that, for now. You rest again in the afternoon, conserving energy. Frost management is tiring work in a subtle way. It requires patience more than strength. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the fire and the faint settling of snow outside. As evening returns, you prepare for another cold night. You stack extra wood. You arrange furs more deliberately, ensuring no gaps. You keep water close to the fire to prevent freezing. You adjust the door latch to ensure it seals tightly. You lie down and feel the cold press in from the edges again. You respond instinctively now, shifting position, pulling layers tighter, feeding the fire just enough to maintain balance. Frost may return overnight, but you know how to meet it. Indoor ice is not failure. It is information. It tells you where winter pushes hardest and where you must respond. You accept this lesson without frustration. As sleep approaches, the cabin settles into its familiar rhythm. Fire crackles softly. Logs creak faintly. Snow rests heavy outside. Frost glimmers briefly near the floor, then fades as warmth spreads. You close your eyes and let your breathing slow. Winter has tightened its grip, but you remain inside the narrow space where warmth still holds. For tonight, that is enough. You will wake again, read the frost's message, and respond. This quiet exchange continues until spring decides to speak louder. You begin the day the same way you always do now, not because you planned it that way, but because repetition has proven itself useful. You wake, you listen, you check the fire, you breathe. These actions come before thought, before doubt, before the weight of the season can press too hard. Routine steadies the mind in ways warmth alone cannot. You rise slowly and stretch, knowing exactly how far your body will allow without protest. That knowledge feels earned. You no longer test limits out of curiosity. Winter has removed the urge. You move with intention, conserving energy while keeping blood flowing. The fire responds as expected. A small stir of coals, a measured addition of wood. Flame returns without complaint. That predictability is comforting. In a world shaped by uncertainty, reliable outcomes feel like victories. You take a moment to tidy the cabin, though it hardly needs it. You sweep the floor lightly, clearing ash and debris. You realign the woodpile. You hang damp items where they will dry evenly. None of this is urgent. That is the point. These tasks exist to give structure to time that might otherwise stretch too wide. Many winter accounts describe men keeping strict daily patterns even when alone. Wake at the same hour, eat at the same times, perform the same chores in the same order. Not because it improved efficiency, but because it anchored the mind. Routine became a substitute for community. You sit near the fire and work on something small. Today, it is mending a tear in a glove. Yesterday, it was carving a peg for the wall. Tomorrow, it might be sharpening tools again. These projects do not change your survival prospects much, but they occupy your hands and calm your thoughts. Your mind wanders less when your hands are busy. You notice this clearly now. Idle moments invite worries that serve no purpose. Keeping busy keeps you present. You eat slowly, not out of scarcity alone, but out of habit. Each bite is deliberate. You taste smoke, fat, salt. Flavors are simple, but familiar. Familiarity comforts more than richness ever could. After eating, you step outside briefly, even when you do not need to. Fresh air sharpens your senses and reminds you that the world still exists beyond these walls. You never linger long, just enough to feel cold, bite your cheeks, and then retreat again. You check the same landmarks each day, the same tree line, the same drift near the door, the same section of roof. These repeated observations help you notice change quickly. A drift higher than yesterday, a branch bent lower. Small shifts become visible only through routine. Some historians suggest these habits functioned as early warning systems, allowing men to catch problems before they escalated. Others argue routines were more about mental comfort than practical advantage. Standing here, glancing at a familiar snowbank, you know both can be true at once. Inside again, you sit and listen. Silence no longer feels empty. It feels layered. Fire, snow settling, wood adjusting, your own breath. These sounds form a pattern you recognize instantly. When something changes, you notice. You keep track of days without marking them, not by number, but by condition. The day the storm buried the door, the morning frost crept halfway up the wall, the night the fire almost failed. Memory organizes itself around experience rather than dates. You sometimes speak these memories aloud, recounting them quietly as if telling a story. It helps solidify them. It makes time feel less blurred. There is no audience, but that does not matter. You lie down briefly in the afternoon, not to sleep deeply, but to rest. Closing your eyes resets the mind. You listen to the fire and let thoughts drift without following them. This pause is part of the routine too. Some winter journals mention men deliberately scheduling rest, even when they felt capable of more. Pushing constantly led to mistakes. Rest preserved clarity. You understand that now, without needing explanation. As evening approaches, the routine tightens again. You prepare for night. Stack wood. Check the latch. Adjust furs. The order never changes. The predictability brings calm. When everything is done, you feel a quiet satisfaction settle in. You sit near the hearth and watch flames for a while. This is not wasted time. Fire watching is meditation here. It keeps your attention anchored and slows racing thoughts. You follow the movement of light and shadow without analysis. Outside, night settles. Inside, you remain steady. Routine has done its work again. There is debate among scholars about whether such routines emerged consciously or naturally among isolated winter survivors. Some argue men deliberately imposed structure to maintain sanity. Others believe routine arose instinctively, shaped by necessity. Either way, the result is the same. Stability in an unstable world. You eat one last small portion before sleep, not hunger-driven, habit-driven. You want warmth through the night, not fullness. You drink warm water and wipe your hands dry. You lie down and arrange furs carefully, repeating the same motions you have performed countless times now. Your body relaxes as soon as everything falls into place. This position signals rest. Sleep arrives more easily tonight. Not deep, but smoother. Your mind quiets faster. Thoughts line up and fade instead of colliding. You wake briefly once or twice to tend the fire, then settle again without frustration. This interruption no longer feels like disturbance. It feels normal. As the night passes, you remain wrapped in routine like another layer of insulation. It protects you from drifting too far into worry or loneliness. It keeps you oriented. By morning, when light returns and frost patterns shift again, you rise without resistance. The routine begins anew, ready to carry you through another day. Small actions, repeated faithfully, have become your strongest defense against cold, against isolation, against the slow erosion of resolve. Winter has not changed that truth. It has only made it more visible. You notice the change before you fully trust it. The air feels different when you open the door in the morning. Still cold, still sharp, but no longer cutting in quite the same way. It lingers instead of biting, as if winter has loosened its grip just enough to test what you will do next. You stand there for a moment, breathing carefully, letting your body decide whether this shift is real. Snow near the cabin looks heavier today. Not deeper, just denser. The surface sags slightly under its own weight. You kneel and press a gloved hand into it, feeling how it gives more easily than before. This is the first sign. Not warmth, not comfort, but change. The thaw does not arrive loudly. It whispers. Inside the cabin, the walls tell the same story. Damp patches spread where frost once clung. Soot streaks soften. The smell changes too. Smoke still dominates, but beneath it, something earthy begins to surface. Wet wood, old mud, rot waiting patiently for its chance. You move slowly, inspecting everything with new attention. Spring will not rescue you immediately. It introduces new problems, while winter still lingers close enough to punish mistakes. This in-between time demands more care, not less. You press a finger into a log seam, where chinking has held firm for weeks. It yields slightly now. Mud softens as temperatures creep upward. Gaps widen again, not from cold contraction, but from thaw and movement. The cabin begins to breathe in a different way, less rigid, more fragile. Historical accounts from trapping regions often mention this period as one of the most dangerous, not because of cold, but because structures weakened, just as men relaxed. Roofs that held heavy snow all winter suddenly faced added weight from meltwater. Floors turned slick. Walls shifted unevenly. The cabin that survived blizzards could fail quietly in thaw. You step outside and walk the perimeter, boots sinking more deeply with each step. Snow pulls at you now instead of supporting your weight. What once felt solid becomes treacherous. You choose each step carefully, testing before committing. The roof demands immediate attention. Snow that once slid cleanly now clings, heavy and wet. You knock it loose with controlled movements, sending thick slabs sliding away in slow, dangerous drops. Each fall lands with a dull thud instead of a whisper. The sound alone tells you how much weight you are dealing with. You pause often, listening to the roof settle, watching for new cracks or sudden shifts. This is patient work. Rushed movements here invite collapse. Many abandoned cabins show signs of failure during thaw rather than storm. Beams bowed and broken under loads that changed too quickly. Inside again, you notice the floor has darkened in places. Meltwater creeps inward, drawn by gravity and warmth. You scrape shallow channels to guide it away from sleeping areas and the hearth. Standing water becomes ice overnight if temperatures dip again, creating hazards where you least expect them. You hang gear higher now, keeping it away from damp air near the floor. Leather stiffens differently when wet and cold alternate. Mold becomes a threat. You clean surfaces more often, wiping soot and moisture away before they combine into something worse. Food storage changes too. Frozen meat begins to soften. You must adjust portions and timing, cooking what might spoil first. The rhythm of eating shifts again, guided by preservation rather than pure calorie count. There is a lesser discussed detail in winter narratives about men struggling more during thaw than deep freeze, not physically, but mentally. The promise of relief tempted carelessness. Some pushed too hard, traveled too soon, trusted ice that no longer held. The transition tested judgment as much as endurance. You feel that temptation now. The idea of movement stirs, of going farther, of breaking the routine that carried you through winter. You resist it deliberately. The thaw is not freedom yet, it is instability. You sit near the hearth and let the fire burn lower than before. Too much heat accelerates melt and moisture buildup. You aim for balance again, though the rules have changed slightly. Smoke behaves differently in warmer air. Drafts reverse more often. You adjust patiently. You notice sounds returning outside. A drip, then another. Water falling from branches and roof edges, irregular and persistent. The forest begins to wake, though cautiously. These sounds feel loud after months of muffled silence. You listen carefully, cataloguing them. Sound carries information again. The drip tells you where melt concentrates. The gurgle beneath snow hints at water finding its old paths. Some historians argue that this period required as much vigilance as midwinter, though of a different kind. Cold punished directly, thaw punished indirectly. The margin for error remained thin. You reinforce weak spots in the cabin as best you can, adding extra support where logs have shifted. These repairs are temporary. You know that. The cabin was never meant to last forever. It was meant to last long enough. You rest often, not from exhaustion, but from caution. Slippery ground and shifting structures demand a clear head. You slow everything down. As evening approaches, temperatures drop slightly again. The cycle repeats. Melt by day, freeze by night. The cabin groans softly as materials expand and contract more dramatically than before. You listen and adjust, responding rather than reacting. You lie down later, aware that sleep may be lighter now. The cabin is changing. Winter is changing. That uncertainty hums quietly beneath everything. Still, you feel something else too. Relief, subtle and restrained. The knowledge that time has moved, that endurance has accumulated, that this long stretch is bending toward an end, even if that end remains distant. You close your eyes and let the fire settle. Drips continue outside, steady and uneven. The sound is neither comforting nor threatening. It simply exists, marking time. This phase demands as much patience as any blizzard, perhaps more. The rules you learned still apply, but they must be adjusted carefully, without rush. As you drift towards sleep, you hold on to that discipline. Winter taught you how to endure. Thaw will teach you how not to hurry. The cabin still stands. You still breathe. And the season, for the first time in many weeks, has begun to move again. You think more now, not in circles like before, but in long, slow lines that connect moments across the season. The cabin feels different in this stage. Not weaker exactly, but more honest. It shows you what endured and what barely survived. You sit near the hearth and let these observations settle without forcing conclusions. Mistakes reveal themselves quietly, not as disasters, but as patterns you recognize too late. The spot where drafts always return despite repeated chinking. The nights you fed the fire too heavily and woke to thick smoke and burning eyes. The days you pushed too far, came back sweating, and paid for it with shivering later. Winter does not lecture, it records. You walk the cabin and touch the walls again, reading them with your hands. Here is where you should have added another layer of insulation earlier. Here is where a better roof angle would have shed snow more reliably. These realizations do not bring regret. They bring clarity. If you ever build another cabin, it will be different. Many first-hand accounts written after winter seasons carry this same tone. Not triumph, not complaint. Reflection. Men listed what worked and what did not, often with surprising humility. They knew winter did not reward pride. It rewarded adjustment. You think about the nights you ignored, early signs of fatigue, staying awake longer than needed, tending the fire obsessively instead of trusting it. Those nights left you drained the next day, less sharp, more prone to small errors. Endurance is not about constant vigilance. It is about knowing when to rest. Food choices come back to mind. The days you ate too little, trying to stretch supplies, and found your hands colder, your thoughts slower. The days you ate enough fat and felt warmth build more easily. Calories were not indulgence. They were insulation. You step outside briefly and look at the land around the cabin. Paths you walked daily are carved into the snow and mud now, visible evidence of routine. Beyond them, untouched ground remains uncertain. You see how discipline narrowed your world, but also protected you within it. Some trappers wrote later that winter taught them more than any mentor ever could, not through instruction, but through consequence. The lessons arrived, whether invited or not. Those who survived learned them. Those who did not left only traces. You remember a detail from a winter journal where a man admitted he learned the value of patience only after losing nearly everything to haste. His tone was not bitter. It was calm, almost relieved, as if the lesson itself was worth the cost. You understand that sentiment now. Though you are grateful, your own lessons came cheaper. The fire burns lower these evenings. You no longer push it as hard. You know now how much warmth you actually need, not how much makes you feel safe. Excess always carried its own risks. Smoke, dryness, wood waste. Balance proves itself again. You consider how often you underestimated small tasks early on. Clearing snow just enough, drying gear properly, checking the same trap line repeatedly even when success felt unlikely. Those actions built resilience, invisibly. The payoff came later, when conditions worsened and you had fewer decisions left to make. There is ongoing discussion among historians about whether winter survival depended more on experience or temperament. Some argue skill alone mattered most. Others emphasize patience and restraint. Looking back over your own season, you suspect they are inseparable. Skill without restraint invites mistakes. Restraint without skill limits opportunity. You sit and let your hands rest idle for once. That feels earned now. You do not need to fill every moment with activity. Winter has already taken its measure of you. It has taught what it needed to teach. You think about the first nights again. The uncertainty, the constant tension, the way every sound felt urgent. That sharp edge has dulled. Not because danger disappeared, but because you learned how to read it more accurately. Mistakes still exist. You see them clearly now. The storage choice that allowed mice easier access. The trap placement that worked poorly for weeks before you moved it. The insulation you added too late. But these errors did not end you. They instructed you. Some accounts suggest that many mountain men who survived winter never returned the following year. Not from fear, but from satisfaction. They proved to themselves what they needed to know. Others returned again and again, drawn by the clarity hardship brought. Both responses feel valid now. You lie down and let the fire watch over you as you replay moments quietly. The storm that tested the roof, the morning frost that crept indoors, the illness that forced you to slow. Each event taught something specific, not abstract wisdom, practical adjustment. You recognize how winter stripped away assumptions. You began with ideas about comfort, strength, efficiency. You end with different measures. Warmth matters more than convenience. Consistency matters more than effort. Awareness matters more than force. You think about how these lessons arrived too late to change the past, but just in time to shape the future. That timing feels deliberate. Winter does not care what you wish you had known. It only cares what you do next. The cabin settles quietly around you. Its flaws remain visible, but so does its resilience. You share that quality now. Imperfect, adjusted, still standing. As sleep approaches, you feel a calm acceptance settle in. Not relief that winter is ending, though it is. Not pride in surviving, though you did. Just understanding. Understanding that survival here was never about one dramatic choice. It was about hundreds of small ones, made imperfectly, corrected slowly, and carried forward without complaint. You close your eyes and let the fire burn low. Tomorrow will bring more change, more decisions. But tonight, you rest with the knowledge that winter taught you what it could, and you listened. You stand at the doorway longer now, not because you hesitate, but because you are aware this moment carries weight. The cabin behind you is quieter than it once was. Not empty, just settled, like something that has finished its work. The air outside smells different. Damp earth pushes through the last sharp edges of cold. Snow still dominates the ground, but it no longer feels eternal. You step out and let the door close gently. No rush, no need to prove anything to the wood and iron that carried you through. The snow beneath your boots gives way more easily now, collapsing instead of cracking. Each step sinks slightly, then releases. Movement has changed again. You walk a slow circle around the cabin, the same path you have traced countless times. Now, you see it differently. The walls lean a fraction more than before. Chinking has softened. Soot stains tell stories you recognize. This place looks tired, but proud in its own way. Cabins like this were rarely meant to last beyond a season or two. Records from frontier regions show that many were abandoned once winter ended, left to sag, rot, and eventually disappear back into the land. Their purpose was temporary by design, shelter long enough to endure, nothing more. You run a hand along one log, feeling dampness where frost once ruled. You remember cutting this tree, shaping it in haste, hoping it would hold. It did. That matters more than craftsmanship ever could. You think about leaving. Not immediately, but soon. Spring routes will open. Rivers will loosen. Trails will reappear. With them comes choice. Choice you did not have for months. That realization feels strange, almost heavy. You consider what you will carry with you. Tools, of course. Furs. Knowledge. But also habits that may no longer be necessary. Waking to tend a fire in the dark. Measuring time in logs burned. Listening for drafts as if they were voices. Some of these will fade. Others will stay with you longer than expected. Many mountain men wrote very little about the moment they left their winter cabins. It appears as a brief note at best. Packed up, moved on. Perhaps the departure felt too ordinary after so much effort, or perhaps it felt too personal to record. You understand that now. Leaving does not feel triumphant. It feels quiet, like closing a chapter without needing to reread it. You look outward, toward the land beyond the immediate clearing. Snow thins in places, revealing dark ground beneath. The forest looks less hostile, though you know better than to trust appearances. Spring brings its own risks. Swollen rivers, unstable ground, hunger before new growth arrives. Still, the balance has shifted. Winter no longer holds absolute authority. You turn back once more and study the cabin. This place shaped you in ways no teacher could. It stripped life down to essentials and demanded attention to things most people never notice. Heat, moisture, movement, rest. Small decisions repeated faithfully. Some historians suggest winter cabins were less about shelter and more about discipline, forcing men into routines that revealed their limits. Others argue cabins simply bought time. Standing here now, you see truth in both. Time was the gift. What you did with it became the lesson. You step back inside one last time. The air smells of smoke and damp wood. Familiar. You pack deliberately. Not hurried. Not sentimental. Items go where they belong. Anything you leave behind, you leave with intention. No clutter. No apology. You feed the fire lightly and let it burn down. There is no need to extinguish it completely. Snow and damp will take care of that once you are gone. The cabin will cool slowly, returning warmth to the ground that lent it in the first place. You sit for a moment near the hearth, feeling heat on your palms. This was the center of your world. Everything radiated from here. Now, it feels smaller, not because it changed, but because you did. You rise and shoulder your pack. The weight feels manageable, familiar. You move to the door and pause again. hand on the latch. You take one steady breath and step outside. The door closes behind you with a soft sound, not final, just complete. You walk away at an unhurried pace, choosing a path that avoids deep melt and unstable ground. Each step carries you farther from the routines that sustained you and closer to the uncertainty ahead. This uncertainty feels different now, not threatening, simply open. You do not look back immediately. You give the cabin time to fade from focus. It deserves that respect. Winter taught you how to stay. Now it teaches you how to leave. The season did not end suddenly. It loosened, gradually, allowing you to adjust without breaking. That feels intentional, even if you know better. You move on with quiet confidence, carrying lessons you did not know you were learning at the time. Balance, patience, attention. These will matter wherever you go next. As the cabin slips from sight behind trees and drifts, you feel no rush of emotion, just steadiness. That, more than anything, tells you how deeply winter shaped you. You continue forward, leaving the wooden cabin to settle, rot, and eventually disappear. Its work is done. Yours continues. You have reached the final phase of the journey. What follows is the 300-word wind-down. As promised, the pace slows here. The voice softens. Nothing more is required of you. You keep walking, but your steps grow lighter, almost automatic, as if the land itself is carrying you forward now. The cold still exists, but it no longer presses so close. It drifts at the edges of awareness, like a memory that has lost its sharpness. Your breathing settles into an easy rhythm. In, out. Steam rises, then fades. Behind you, the cabin becomes quiet in a different way. Not abandoned, simply resting. Snow and thaw will finish what time has already begun. Wood will soften. Logs will sink back into the earth. Smoke stains will blur. And eventually, nothing will remain but a slight clearing and a story the land remembers, even when people do not. You feel warmth that no longer comes from fire alone. It comes from knowing you adapted, you paid attention, you listened when winter spoke softly, and when it roared. You learned when to act, when to wait, and when to do nothing at all. Your shoulders relax. The constant readiness you carried for months loosens its grip. Muscles unclench. Thoughts slow. The tight focus that kept you alive gently releases, like a knot untied without force. The sounds around you grow calmer. Snow dripping from branches, water moving beneath ice, a distant bird testing its voice. These sounds no longer demand analysis. They simply exist, and that is enough. You no longer count logs. You no longer measure time by embers or frost lines on the wall. Time opens again, wide and unmarked, and you step into it without fear. As you move forward, the lessons stay with you, quiet and steady, balance over force, consistency over urgency, awareness over struggle. And now, there is nothing left to do. Let your breathing slow. Let the images fade. Let the cold drift away. You are safe. You endured. You may rest. Sweet dreams.